Yes, I was a few minutes late today because I was battling with broken computer stuff, and it's
Oh, me too.
no, not that kind of broken computer stuff. The kind of broken. I should know not to do this right before I was supposed to record a podcast, but whatever. My son is setting up his account at his college. He's selected a college. He's enrolled.
Oh, congrats!
You get to set up your computer account, right? And I wanted to go through it and make sure everything was all right or whatever and do all this stuff. And the account made him set up two-factor, whatever. Or I don't know. It asked him to set up two-factor, and he did. And he used the Google Authenticator app because it's an app that he had used previously, I think, for two-factor stuff. But anyway, he had it on his phone, and he did that. But I wanted to get it set up in the Apple two-factor thing because it's nice when you're in Safari or when you're on your Mac or whatever. Like the Apple has, people who don't know, the Apple has a thing in their sort of iCloud keychain thing where it can do two-factor stuff for you. You don't have to launch a separate app or whatever. It will autofill right in the thing out of your iCloud keychain. That's what I wanted to set up for him because yes, you can have the Google Authenticator app, but it would be nice for also it to be integrated with, iOS and macOS and all that other stuff. Seems like a simple task. It is technically possible, technically 100% possible, but frustratingly annoying to do. So here are the two things. So first of all, I wouldn't be angry and late if it wasn't for the fact that the school's thing is broken, right? So that's the first problem. The first problem is, right, that
definitely not your fault, John. Definitely not.
I'll tell you how the school thing is. The school thing was broken in a pretty bad way. But how did I find out the school things were broken? Well, I was trying to accomplish that task, right? So he'd already set it up. It was set up, and we logged in with it with two-factor. He's got a username, he's got a password, he's got two-factor right out of the Google Authenticator app, logs you in, right? Anyone who's ever done this, again, it is technically possible to take that information and shove it into the Apple thing, but it is not easy, and it's definitely not easy to do when you're trying to do it 10 minutes before you have to podcast, right? So here's the problem. The Apple thing wants you to go on the happy path, which is, I am using Safari to set up my account on this website. I'm going to enable two-factor. It has presented me with a QR code or some other thing. Oh, look, in Safari, I can just right-click on that, and it says, do you want to set this up as the authentication thingamabobber? And I say yes, and it magically goes in. That's what they want you to do. But of course, that already happened a while ago, right? It's already set up in two-factor, and we didn't do it the Apple way, right? So here we are now. I say, I want to get this two-factor thing into the Apple system without, invalidating the existing thing. Again, technically possible, right? Especially since Google Authenticator added an export function. You can export and it'll show you a QR code with that export information or whatever. And then you can, decode that QR code, and then you can base64 decode it, and then you can run it through a protobuf thing and try to get out the data. And this is what I'm doing 10 minutes before the thing starts.
This is seriously what you have to do? Oh my gosh.
I mean, but the point is, it's not like the data is there. Like QR codes aren't magic. It's just data, right? But, because you can export two-factor stuff from the Google Authenticator app as a QR code. What you can't do easily is get that QR code, as far as I know, into Apple's system, right? So you go to the Google Authenticator app, you get the QR code, you can take a screenshot of it, you can take a photo or whatever. I just want to get that into the Apple system, and they make it so hard. The way I used to do it is I would go to the two-factor setup page of the website, and I would take the QR code from the Google Authenticator app, save it as an image, turn it into a data URL, use the DOM inspector to paste it in as the image source of the setup thing, and then Safari would be tricked into thinking, oh, do you want me to use that QR code as the setup thing? Because it's on a setup page, like whatever heuristics it uses, I would bring to the real setup page, but I wouldn't click through it. I would just bring to the real setup page, and I would replace the image with a data URL of the QR code from the Google Authenticator app. That used to work. But now, when you right-click in Safari, somehow it's smart and it goes, I don't see any QR code here. I don't know what you're on. It doesn't even show the line item for setup verification system. So please, Ricky, if you're listening, please. If I've got a QR code, if you go to the passwords thing in system preferences, it says, oh, do you want to enter a setup code here? I don't know what it wants from me from a setup code. I've got a QR code and I can decode it and I can pull out different pieces, but I don't know what it wants from me from a setup code. Please, can I just give you an image of a QR code? I've got a ping, I've got a JPEG. Can you let me scan it with my phone? That's the one thing I didn't try. Maybe there's a way if you do it on iOS, maybe you can just take a picture of it with the phone's camera and it'll let you add it. But I couldn't figure it out, and that was making me very angry. And it's I'm so close. why is Safari like, because they want it to be magic. Oh, you just right click on the QR code and it says set this up as authentication. But it somehow is angered by me editing the DOM, which maybe makes sense. Like if you were to look at the web page, you say there's a QR code. When I right click into Safari, why doesn't it take it? It's like, well, it's not the real QR code. It's the one I made into a data URL and pasted into the source thing. I kind of get it, but it's just so much harder than it needs to be, because it's like, you guys, the data is right here. Like it's often on the same computer, because I had like one window logged in and like Chrome, and then the Safari window. It's like, same team, people. We're all here. Let's just make this happen. And I just could not do it. So anyway, that's just angering me. And so I'm like, okay, well, why am I trying to do this? This is such a stupid thing to be doing. Like, oh, you have the two-factor already are set up and you're trying to transfer it to the Apple thing. Well, yes, again, it is technically possible. I know, I've done it. I've done it multiple times, but you can't figure out how to get it to work this time. It's obviously not a supported use case. Just forget it. And what's the thing you should do then? How about just start over?
Or use 1Password.
Use the 1Password. No, I want it into the Apple thing.
This is the most effort I've ever heard to avoid using 1Password.
Right?
Thank you. I don't want to use 1Password. The goal is I want it in the Apple operating system thing, in addition to other places that it might be. So yes, it could be in 1Password, but if it was a 1Password, I would also want it in the Apple thing. Like that's the goal here, to get it in the iOS, iCloud keychain, that whole deal, right? Anyway. So I'm like, okay, well, you can just reset up two-factor. If anyone who has two-factor knows you can do this. If you just say, okay, I want to set up two-factor again. I got a new phone, or I'm going to get a new phone, or whatever. You can just go in, you log in with your existing two-factor, and you say, I want a new two-factor. And it gives you a new QR code, and you scan the new QR code, or you right-click it in Safari, or whatever, and that's your new two-factor, right? And since I'm doing that from the beginning, I can do that from the beginning from Safari, right? The happy path. Oh, I go in and do it in Safari, I right click. Then it does give you the option, set up as two-factor. And of course, like all good two-factor things, it says, but I'm not letting you off the screen until you type in the magic code from that you now get out of the Safari Apple thing, like to show that you successfully did it. So I do that. I set it up in Safari. It says, please enter the 6-digit code here. And Safari autofills a 6-digit code, right? Because that's what the whole point of this feature. And it works. And it says, great, I believe that you successfully set up two-factor, right? It even gives you backup codes, the whole 9 yards. You're like, this is awesome. Everything's great. But this is where these schools bugs come in. If then you try to log in any other web browser, your codes won't work. The 6-digit code just will not work, right? And I tried it in different accounts and different devices or whatever. And even though it successfully worked when I, configured it, it won't work anywhere else. And that's a scary situation to be in, where you think you've just successfully set up two-factor. You've verified to the system that you've set up two-factor by entering the 6 digits from the QR code that you just scanned, and it says, yes, great, that's good. But you can't log in anywhere else, because every place else you go, you enter a username and password, it prompts you for the code, and whatever code you enter from your thing, it says, nope, not valid.
That is not encouraging at all.
That's the school's bug, okay? Because that's not the way the world's supposed to work. That's just broken. It's a bug. But then what do? So luckily, the school had a big honking button on the setup screen, which I'm, frantically making sure that I stay logged into, right? That says, disable multi-factor authentication. Like, all right, well, I got a podcast. Let me just disable multi-factor authentication entirely. Click disable multi-factor, and it says, boop, it goes back to the screen, and now the button is set up multi-factor authentication, right? The disable button's gone, and now I have a button to set it up. But I don't want to set it up. I don't want to deal with this now. Let me just disable multi-factor. But of course, me being me, I don't trust the system anymore. I try logging in from literally anywhere else. And it prompts me for, please enter your verification code from your multi-factor authentication.
No.
Like, I just disabled it. I'm logged in here. I'm staring at the screen where it is disabled. I'm so angry. I'm like, it's just totally broken. And of course, none of the, no codes from the existing ones that I had saved before worked. The original one or the new one, doesn't matter what you enter, nothing works. And I knew for a fact that if I logged out of that one window where I was logged in, I would never be able to log in again, right? I just know. Now I know the system is broken. I know how it's broken. It thinks I've disabled two-factor, but it's still prompting me for it. So the best I could do was, it seemed there was an iOS app. So I downloaded the iOS app on 2 different phones. I logged into the iOS app using a special iOS app specific login QR code. So now I'm logged in on 2 iPhones. And then I logged out in the web browser, and sure enough, no web browser can ever log in again, because even though two-factor is supposedly disabled, it prompts you for the two-factor code. So then from one of the logged in iPhones, I contacted the online support chat and said, here I am. And I'm locked out of my thing because I disabled two-factor, but it thinks I still have it enabled. And they just directed me to talk to some other thing or whatever. And then I had to start podcasting. So school stuff is broken, whatever. That's annoying. But I feel like the main, that's just bugs. That's just whatever. But I really wish, and again, if you can do this in iOS, I didn't get a chance to look at that, but I really wish there was an easier way to say, I've already got two-factor set up somewhere, whether that's in 1Password, in Google Authenticator, in one of the 50 other, in Authy, in one of the 50 other two-factor apps. Almost all of those systems have a way to sort of export that two-factor thing, either by showing a QR code or whatever. What's the point of exporting if I can't import it? And the only thing that I can find to import an Apple's thing is cleverly make a Safari web page on the actual website so you can trick it into showing that line item in the right-click menu, which apparently I've now lost the ability to do no matter how clever I get. Or enter what it calls a setup key, and I have no freaking idea what it wants from me there. Like, is it the base 32 decoded section of the base 64 encoded data section of the proto buffer from the Google? I don't know, but anything I entered there, it would accept all sorts of garbage, but it wouldn't be right. So I'm obviously entering the wrong thing there. So please make this easier. Like, two-factor information is our information. We should be allowed to have it in Authy, in 1Password, in Google Authenticator, and in iCloud Keychain. There should be a way to go from one place to the other, and it should be way easier than it is.
So Alex's first real interaction with his forthcoming school is going to be his dad breaking his login.
I didn't break his login. The school broke the login.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
It's not my fault, you guys. It's not my fault.
If I click disable multi-factor authentication and then it proceeds to always prompt me for multi-factor authentication, that's not me. That's not on me at all. That's just a broken system in the school.
I wasn't hacking. I was just discovering vulnerabilities.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to start with a little bit of follow-out, if I may. Clockwise, episode 449. It featured one John Siracusa, and this is remarkable because of all the guest spots that you've done, John, on all the great podcasts and all the great shows, it was very unusual, if it has ever happened, and I know there was a little bit of debate on the show, but if it has ever happened, it's very unusual for you to be able to record Clockwise at noon your time on a Wednesday. But it's a whole new world, baby. And here is John Siracusa appearing on Clockwise. Made me very happy.
Yeah, Dan tells me that I did it in the past, and I probably did back when Jason was hosting, like years and years and years ago, but I had no recollection. I didn't even remember how the show worked. I didn't even know that there was a fixed order that people go around in the clock. So I was just total, as Allison called me on the show, I was a total noob.
Well, it was a good episode, and well under 30 minutes. I was quite surprised. But I'm using this as a crummy excuse to ask you, how is your new world? I know a lot of this is covered on Rec Diffs, and I know I'm kind of I'm inviting myself into Merlin's world, and I apologize profusely. I'm stealing Merlin's valor on this, but
he's so mad.
How is your whole new world? He's so mad. How is your whole new world? Is there anything you'd like to share with the group right here on ATP, on your big show?
I don't think there are any new developments in that area. I did talk a lot about it on Rec Diffs and how weird it was and how strangely stressful, and that kind of continues because I'm still working on those boulders, that giant life backlog of things that I have to get done, and we're still working through them. Every time I think we're making progress, I did make progress on one. I mean, you've seen this in the neutral channel. We had a little problem with the car. We had a fender bender, and getting that repaired was a surprise thing to be thrown on the pile. And we actually finally got the car back. And despite the only bad thing that happened as a result of that, aside from us having to pay our deductible, is they tried to clean the inside of the car and they used like Armor All, and you know how that is. I don't like it.
Oh God, it's everything's all slippery and shiny.
Yeah, it's gross. And so I spent a little while this afternoon it was like outgassing onto the windshield and gross. I spent a little while trying to essentially wipe off the Armor All from the inside.
Yeah, you got to get in there like with a towel.
Yeah, spent some time doing that this afternoon. But anyway, that's an example of like a surprise thing. Like, surprise, you got to deal with cars and insurance and whatever. And I'm just glad I got that done. But there's so many other big backlog items that I'm just trying to drag kicking and screaming across the finish line. And I look at them and like I have a to-do list, and a notes thing or whatever. And I don't check them off until they're done. So there was an item that said, fix car, right? I just checked that off because like car is back on the driveway. It is fixed. And I checked it off, but I can't check off any of the other ones because they're all like still one or two more things to be done. And that's kind of still the phase I'm in, working on those boulders.
We are brought to you this week by Linode. Visit linode.com/ATP and see why Linode is my favorite place to run servers. And it isn't just me. G2 and Trust Radius both rated them the top infrastructure as a service provider. And, it's easy to see why. First of all, they are a great web host. This means they have great capabilities. Things like GPU compute plans, dedicated CPU plans, high memory plans, block storage, Kubernetes, all sorts of amazing API access, scriptability. They support centralized tools like Terraform. They just have so much to offer. And it's all backed by amazing and award-winning support. 24/7, 365, no matter how much you're paying them. There's no different levels of users, a different quality of support. Everyone gets that same support, whether you're paying them $5 or $10 a month or thousands. Everyone gets the same support. And I've used it before, and it's just, they are really, really good support. And finally, biggest reason for me is it's an incredible value at Linode. This is why I've been with them for the better part of a decade now. And every time the technology moves on that allows them to offer you more for your money, they do. So they either drop the prices of what you were getting or they give you more, and they make migration super easy. And so it's been the best value I've seen in the business for the entire time I've been a customer there. And every so often, I'll look around and I'll see, what's everyone else charging for these kind of resources? And Linode is always either matching or beating everyone else that I can find. And they just have incredible service with that. So I just love Linode. They make cloud computing fast, simple, and affordable. So you can focus on your projects, not your infrastructure. Go to linode.com/ATP, create a free account, and you get $100 in credit. You can give them either your Google account, your GitHub account, or just your email address, no matter what. $100 in credit with any new account. Once again, linode.com/ATP. Thank you so much to Linode for being an awesome host and for sponsoring our show.
That brings us to my victory tour. There was a great showing for t-shirts and membership recently. So genuinely, thank you so much to anyone who even thought about buying a t-shirt or a mug or a glass, or has considered a membership or maybe bought a membership. Maybe you canceled, but you certainly don't have to. Maybe you didn't.
Well, and honestly, we're doing great. And it's very clear that there was a John Siracusa is now self-employed bump in membership.
Oh, yeah. That's no joke. That's for real.
Normally when we have merchandise sales, we get a small bump just because, people actually listen to John and sign up for a little bit, get the code, and then maybe cancel later if they want to. But you don't have to. But this is a substantially bigger bump than I think we usually get from membership sales. And I attribute that entirely to the John effect, because John is the public's favorite member of the show by a long shot. And so
I don't know about that.
Oh, 1,000% true.
I think the bump was the same size as it always is. If you want to make it a bump for me, what I would say is more people need to forget to cancel. So that's when we'll see. What we see the bump. I didn't measure it last time, but my recollection is that it is a similar size bump. People do what we say. Sign up for the membership, get the discount, and then cancel if you want to. But it's how many people don't cancel? How many people stick around, or will we just fall back to the levels we were before?
All of them should not cancel.
Yeah, and so the final results, this is where my victory lap begins. The Ultra shirt, 311 sales as of when I looked right after the sale ended. The Interposer shirt, 1,676, baby. That's 5.3 times. So hashtag Casey was right. Well, sort of. I'm kind of stealing your valor now because it was your idea in the first place, but then you poo-pooed it. I don't care. I'm taking it as mine. Hashtag Casey was right. 5.3 times. I am so excited to get my Interposer shirt. Thank you genuinely to anyone who has signed up for a membership or even considered it, who's bought a t-shirt or any of the other merchandise. Oh, and I should mention that if you did miss the sale, you do not have to tweet me either comically or otherwise, but we do have so the old shirts, the pre-Ultra shirts are up. The print as you want shirts are up. And remember that these do not have anything on the back. And the shirt themselves, or is it the shirt or the printing? I always get it wrong.
This is the printing. And it's not, we have the whole range up. So the on-demand, you're blowing this one. Let me help you. The on-demand products that we have available are all of our M1 shirts. M1, M1 Pro, M1 Max, M1 Ultra. Not the joke shirt. Nothing on the back of any of these. These are on-demand printed, so the printing is not as nice as it is on the real shirts. These shirts are also cheaper. That's why I tell all the people listening to the show, buy during the sale. Those are the good shirts. They cost more, but they're better. But if you totally missed it and you want one, the on-demand printing is more like, I don't know what the process is, but it is not like, it's like they lay down kind of like a lighter color and then do printing on top of it, as opposed to the real shirts where they do multiple printing passes, I think, which with colored ink. So
Yeah, I think that's right.
I hope you got one during the sale. We just have those ones up there for the people who see the shirt on a YouTube video, so we can have them, buy a real shirt instead of one of the million counterfeit ones that's out there, right?
Anyway, enough navel gazing. Let's move right along. I
have some real time follow up before you go into that. This is killing me, but I'm just looking at the screen right now. If I had just done it on the phone has a scan QR code option.
Oh no!
The Mac doesn't have that. The Mac says, please enter a setup key, whatever the hell that is. I wish the Mac had, or drag an image here, and I would have done that because I had an image of it, and I should have just used the phone and done scan QR code. My bad. It doesn't change the fact that the website of the school is totally hosed, and hopefully I'll get that resolved. But the next time I do this, after we get everything resolved, I'll do the right thing.
Well, I'll tell you what. A quick derail here, because it's always a quick derail with me. My tech to-do list is growing.
Oh, I feel the same way. But what's your? Why don't you lay down on the couch and tell us what's bothering you?
Oh my God! All right, so first of all, yes, I'm back with the Ultrafine for this recording because I happen to be here this week and I hate it and everything's diagonal and I can't get the monitor straight and all this stuff. Anyway, that's a separate thing. So recently, when recording another show that isn't out yet, so I won't spoil what it is, but it's not out. But I lost a portion of my audio.
Oh.
This has not happened to me in years. I can't remember if I ever lost a recording or part of a recording before this. I might not have ever done it. So this shook me to the bone. And here's what happened. Listeners may recall a long time ago when I had the new MacBook Pros, the 14 and the 16, and the 14 was always doing Time Machine backups over Wi-Fi because that's how it was backed up. And I noticed that on a pretty regular basis, I would open it up from sleep after not using it for maybe half a day or a day. Things would be kind of unresponsive. I would right-click on something and nothing would happen, or I'd try to open or close an app or navigate to a different page in Safari, and it would just hang weirdly or nothing would happen. Shortly after that, usually it would kernel panic. And the kernel panic indicated something deep in possible file handling code or something. And so I eventually realized, let me try disabling Network Time Machine and see if that fixes it. And it did. That problem has never reoccurred since then. But for some reason, that problem, even though I used Time Machine on my desktop laptop, that problem never occurred on it. Now, I speculated at the time, maybe it was because it was Wi-Fi, or because the desktop laptop is always Thunderbolt Ethernet connected, and the laptop is always just on Wi-Fi. And so I thought maybe it was that, and so I kind of left it alone. Well, as we're recording this podcast, people are talking, I'm occasionally talking, and I'm occasionally navigating to a page in Safari to look something up, and I noticed that pages in Safari kind of stopped loading completely. And at some point, I was going to relaunch Safari. I was going to, right-click on the dock icon, hit quit, relaunch Safari. I right-click on the icon, and the dock beach balls, the dock process beach balls. And I think, oh no, this is not good, because this is how this problem began before on the other computer. I'm in the middle of a recording. I can't launch any new apps or close any apps I have running. And the recording is still going. In the recording app that I'm using, it's still going. So I thought, okay, don't touch anything, and just hope I can get through. We were most of the way through the show, so I thought, let me just hope I can get through the rest of the show. I won't touch any apps. I'll just let the recorder go with Finder beach balling in the background, and I'm just going to let this go and hope I can make it. And then every so often, the other person on it was Skype. The other person on Skype would just cut out for a few seconds, but then they'd come back. So I thought, okay, that's not good. But we're still going. The recording looks like it's still going. It's still, the recording app still says it's going. Okay. Eventually, Skype, the other party just drops out completely. I'm hearing nobody, and I thought, okay, well, this I can't recover from. Let me just reboot everything. So I typed a quick message in the Slack, BRB, computer trouble. Came back, and I learned after I came back, I did finish the show, I learned afterwards that I was missing something like 10 minutes of audio in the middle there. Basically, since the problem had begun, it stopped recording. I had no data from that segment. And this shook me to the core. Again, I've been podcasting professionally for a very long time. I have never lost a recording as far as I can remember. If I did, it's been a long time ago.
Oh, you get used to it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So to lose 10 minutes or so of audio, that killed me. I can't believe I lost that audio. It drives me crazy. I can't believe that happened. And so instantly I thought, I have to make a change. This can never happen again. So my recording setup for, I don't know, the last 2 or 3 years has just been the Sound Devices USB Pre 2, which is my favorite preamp I've ever used for a microphone USB kind of interface. I love it. And in part, I love it because there is absolutely no software. It is just a simple, USB preamp that is covered in knobs and buttons and LEDs. There's no software. There's no touchscreen. There's nothing like that. It's just covered in knobs and buttons. And so everything is done on hardware. And as far as I can tell, the signal path that goes through between the microphone and the headphone monitoring output seems to be 100% analog, which means that when I'm speaking through the USB pre, there is zero latency between the voice that's going into the microphone and the voice I'm hearing in the headphones. No latency whatsoever. And that is something that is only possible when the microphone is connected via analog to the headphone output in some fashion. So
it's not zero, but we know what you mean.
Yes. It's not going through an analog to digital converter, being processed somehow, being routed anywhere, and then being spit back out. There's nothing like that happening on that signal path. And this is the way almost every low-end to mid-range USB XLR interface works. They almost all work this way. Anything that has a headphone output or a monitoring output, usually they work this way until you get into the more advanced ones that have multiple, more than 2 inputs. Sometimes they have built-in mixing capabilities, things like the Sound Devices Mix Pre series, the Zoom F6, things like this. These are mixers that usually have digital routing, so you can change what signals contribute to the headphone mix and stuff like that. And so all of that is always, at least as far as I can tell, it seems to be always done now in the digital domain. So you first convert the signal to digital, route it, process it, whatever you want to do, then you output it to analog. And that introduces usually on the order of a few milliseconds of latency. And the way this manifests itself to me is I sound a little bit worse to myself in my headphones. It's not a huge difference, but I notice it. And I know it's related to latency. Everyone on Twitter is like, you must not be hearing something right. Maybe it's a phase thing. Everyone's, of course, telling me that the problem I'm having is not really the problem I'm having. And I'm telling you it is. And the way I can tell is because when you change the sample rate of the interface, it decreases the latency and it makes the problem less bad. So normally I record everything at 44.1 kilohertz. But if you change the sample rate of the interface from 44.1 all the way up to 192 kilohertz, then it's almost real time. That becomes the point where I can't really hear much of a difference. But at 44.1, I very much can. And so everyone keeps telling me I can't hear it. I assure you, I measured the mix pre-line. It has about 3.4, I think 3 point something milliseconds of latency, and I absolutely hear the difference. It's clear as day to me. And I think I'm a professional podcaster. I should sound in my ears as good as I possibly can to myself because this is what I do. I deserve to have, myself be happy and sound good in my ears. Okay, so but the problem is that almost anything that has built-in recording to almost any interface that records to an SD card goes through that analog to digital cycle before the output because they almost all have some kind of mixing features or something like that. And so I don't think there are any that I can really replace this with that have that. And furthermore, I love the USB Pre 2 for lots of reasons, including the fact that it has analog limiters. And this is, again, something that almost no modern interfaces offer, analog limiters. So that way I can't clip, and it doesn't sound bad like some other methods do, and there's no latency like digital limiters introduced. So all of this is to say, I want to keep my USB Pre 2. So I have this huge, ridiculous setup now. Part of it is still coming from Amazon. Part of it is in process now, where I bought a little Zoom F3, which is this little tiny newly released Zoom recorder that right now I'm going through it at 192. Once I get all my wires from Amazon, I'll be able to actually not listen through it and just have direct output from the USB Pre 2. Anyway, so I had this whole process going. What I should probably do is switch to the mix pre and just suck it up and maybe run it at 192, but that's its own, can of worms. So I don't really want to deal with that. And the great thing about this setup, having it totally separate, is that even if the computer reboots, even if the USB connection gets flaky, this has nothing to do with USB. Right now it's running on batteries. Like it's totally separate. So anyway, happy with that. So moving on from that, that's problem number one that I'm dealing with. So my computer now did that. By the way, to try to, try to figure out what the heck that was, first, the next day I'm using my computer and it just keeps happening. So I'm using my computer regularly, not recording a podcast, not running Skype, doing other things on my computer. And the problem recurs where all of a sudden I can't click on apps, can't close apps, then I eventually have to reboot. And I try, all right, let me switch over and stop using the Synology for Time Machine. Let me change over to, I have a little external SSD, a USB SSD. I'll try that. That way it's not network Time Machine at all. So I turn off the network Time Machine, I connect the USB thing, format it, clear, start new, go. And within a half hour, it happens again, even with that. So now I'm thinking, is it not Time Machine, or is it just any Time Machine? Turn off Time Machine, problem hasn't happened since. So the problem happened, I believe, 4 times in 8 hours, and then 0 times after turning off Time Machine. So I think it was probably Time Machine, but what the heck is that? And now I don't have Time Machine. And that's problem number one.
When I see errors like the one you're describing, maybe it's just me, but I always think my file system is host. Thank you. Because and you was like, well, why would that manifest with Time Machine? Time Machine, especially doing a full backup, has to touch every part of your file system. And if there's any part, it's like bad disk IO, bad sectors, corrupt file system things. If it gets to some point where it's like crawling over your file system and it's trying to read a file and it wanders into like a blocking IO call, right? And that thing just hangs forever because it's local IO call and it's blocking and there's no timeout on it. That's where you get something gets hung up in a beach ball or whatever. So the first thing I do when I see something like that is, disk first aid, FSCK, all that whole 9 yards, boot into recovery mode, see if they have a corrupt snapshot in Time Machine, which happens in APFS a lot. See if I have any errors. And I always suspect disk IO because if disk IO goes bad, that manifests in hard hangs from whatever is trying to do that, and that eventually cascades into terribleness.
Yeah, it feels like the disk has just stalled, or we're running out of file descriptors, or something like that, some kind of disk-related thing.
That could also be one of them. Yeah.
But what leads me to believe it might be like a Mac OS bug is that this happened on the 14-inch months ago, and that was a brand new computer. These are both brand new MacBook Pros from last fall. So I think any kind of hardware disk failure, like bad sectors, I think is unlikely to have happened both this.
Not hardware failure, but disk. What do you call it? File system structure corruption.
Right. But the other thing is they were both clean installs, and they're both used very differently. The small laptop has almost nothing on it, and is only used once every day or two. And there's very few apps, very little new writes happening like that. These have very, very different usage patterns and very different conditions. And that's why I think it's a bug. I think it's a Mac OS bug or an M1 Max bug or something. There's something wrong here. So we'll see. And maybe I'll try your suggestion, see if they find anything, but probably not during the show. But
wow.
Yeah. And by the way, if you do find a corrupt snapshot, you can just delete that snapshot. That's, not that you have, I don't think you have any other choices. In fact, I don't think you can repair a snapshot, but if you find a bad snapshot, you can use TMUtil to delete that snapshot and then do another run of disk utility from recovery mode and make sure it gives you a full clean bill of health, because you'll see it checking all the things, check the top level thing of the device and then check the individual volumes, and it'll check all the snapshots. And once you get a clean bill of health on all those things, then at least that's not the problem.
All right, I'll give that a shot. So anyway, the other area that has been failing, the HomePods. They're on their last legs.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Now, here's the thing, though. I am slightly optimistic for a reason that I probably shouldn't be, but it makes very little sense. But here's the thing. So my HomePods are continually having ridiculous problems. They barely work anymore. They work, maybe 2/3 of the time I ask them to work. That's not a good ratio. And the number of bugs happening, especially with the stereo pair, the number of bugs where the stereo pair breaks or one of them drops out or they just become two separate entities for some reason, or it's happening a lot now. Something is seriously wrong, and it's very clear that Apple has totally broken the software on them, or the hardware, or both, and it's not going to get fixed in a reasonable way anytime soon. So, that being said, when you write an audio app for iOS, and you pay attention to what your users say or what you experience on the iOS point release betas, you can usually predict when Apple's about to either add a major audio feature or release new audio hardware, which usually comes with a new major feature. So every time Apple has released new AirPods, say, or something like that, or the HomePod, they have usually somehow royally messed up audio, usually in an iOS point release, like, 15.1, 15.2, like not like 15.0, like a regular, point X release. Audio gets messed up in the betas, usually shortly before they're about to release new audio hardware that uses something like that. And that just happened for the first time in a while in the 15 point, what are we on, 4? Whatever the recent iOS 15 point whatever beta is. They completely and in a major way broke AirPlay audio for, I think, 2 beta builds. And then they fixed it. And they haven't touched AirPlay audio in a little while. So I'm kind of thinking that we might, this is the only thing I have to support this hypothesis, but we might be about to see new HomePod hardware. If that, this is just a hunch. I have nothing to support this. There's no rumors to this effect, so it's probably wrong. But I think we're about to maybe see new HomePod hardware. And while that would be great, I don't know if I'm going to make it. We use them every day and they're breaking so badly. And so here's what's probably going to happen is I'm going to get fed up with these and replace them with something else. And then that will guarantee new HomePod hardware will come out shortly afterwards.
Hey man, my Ultrafine says the system works. Because I bought this Ultrafine, and then sure enough, I got the studio display just a few months later. So you're welcome, world.
Yeah, so I maybe I will, conjure new HomePods into existence by replacing mine with something else. But we'll see. They're almost ridiculously broken now. Nothing is working reliably anymore about them. It's quite sad. We'll see. We are brought to you this week by Kolide. Kolide is a new take on endpoint management that asks, how can we get end users more involved? This is in contrast to old school device management tools like MDM, which lock down your employees' devices without considering their needs or even attempting to educate them about the security of their device. Kolide is built by like-minded security practitioners who saw in the past just how much MDM was disrupting their end users, often frustrating them so much they would just give up and switch to using their personal laptops without telling anybody. And that's not what anybody wants. Everyone loses in that scenario. So Kolide is different. Instead of locking down a device, Kolide takes a user-focused approach that communicates security recommendations to your employees directly on Slack. After Kolide, device security turns from a black and white state into a dynamic conversation, and it starts with the end users installing the endpoint agent on their own through a guided process that happens right inside their first Slack message. From there, Kolide regularly sends employees recommendations when their device is in an insecure state. This can be simple problems, like the screen lock isn't set right, or it can be hard to solve and nuanced issues, like asking people to secure their 2FA backup codes that are just sitting in their downloads folder. And because it's talking directly to employees, Kolide is educating them about the company's policies and how to best keep their devices secure using real, tangible examples, not theoretical scenarios. So that's Kolide, cross-platform endpoint management for Linux, Mac, and Windows devices that puts end users first for teams that Slack. So visit kolide.com/ATP to learn more and activate your free 14-day trial today. Enter your email when prompted to receive your free Kolide gift bundle after trial activation with no credit card required. Once again, that's Kolide, Kolide, kolide.com/ATP. Thank you so much to Kolide for sponsoring our show.
We had a lot of discussion last episode about double-clicking for wallets and how we could save the quickness or make the lock button quicker by disabling double-clicking, triple-clicking, things of that nature. And we were wondering, well, how do you get into Apple Pay if you can't double-click the side button? And we didn't have a really good answer for that at the time. Well, a few people have written in. Trevor K. writes, for getting into Apple Pay without the side button double-click, first open the wallet app, then select a card, and then double-click the side button. And then Andrew notes that this method still works even when double-clicking the side button feature is disabled globally. So again, if you're deliberately going into the wallet app, selecting a card, if at that point you double-click, it apparently will work. Additionally, some other people have written in that you can add a wallet button to Control Center, which brings up the same double-click side button UI when you're on the lock screen. And Michael Samuels writes, important that tapping the button in Control Center will open the payment sheet only if the phone is locked. If the phone is unlocked, the button will jump to the wallet app instead. So that's worth noting. And then finally, I tried this earlier today when I was in Publix, which is a grocery store in the Southeast. If you just hold a completely sleeping locked phone up next to a payment terminal, it will actually pop up as though you've double clicked, which I had no idea. And a few people have written in about that. That was news to me. So that's kind of cool. So you can do that as well. Obviously, and a lot of people wrote in and said, well, don't you wear an Apple Watch? Well, yes, but we weren't talking about the Apple Watch at this point. I almost never Apple Pay with my phone anymore because anytime I have the occasion to, I have a mask on, and so I would just use the watch, which is much easier in my personal opinion. But yeah, those are a couple different methods to do the double click dance without having it enabled all the time. So still keeping your very fast lock button.
The mask unlock is working pretty well for me, speaking of doing Face ID with mask. And I think this was working kind of before mask unlock, but often when I'm brushing my teeth, I will look at my phone and have to unlock it while I'm brushing my teeth, which I think is a challenging Face ID scenario because at the very least there's a toothbrush coming out of my mouth. And also my hand is kind of in front of it or whatever. And I have pretty good success unlocking my phone while brushing my teeth. I think I had pretty good success doing that before mask unlock, but I wonder if it helped a little bit. But anyway, yeah, mask unlock has been working pretty well for me. And I don't wear an Apple Watch, so I can't do Apple Pay with Apple Watch.
What did people do while we brushed our teeth before smartphones?
You walk around.
Yeah, that's
yeah, no, but then doesn't little toothpaste flecks have the risk of getting other places? Then you don't want them?
Not only if you're really bad at brushing your teeth, or you're 5.
See, the real question is, what did people do when they were pooping before Wi-Fi? That's what I want.
Yeah,
you read. I read entire books on the toilet.
That's true. That's a good point.
Palm Pilot. I played Mealborn a lot and Hearts.
Yeah, I read books on my Palm Pilot. 160 by 160 pixels, perfect for reading a book.
I wonder if the smartphone era has actually made people spend more time brushing their teeth. Like it's easy to get to the full 2 minutes on the electric toothbrush because you have something to do. Like you're moving it around casually, but I feel like it was much easier in the pre-smartphone era to rush through it and accidentally not spend your full 2 minutes brushing your teeth that you're supposed to.
Yeah, that's why walking around is the old standby. So it always works.
Yep. All right, so we got some news about WWDC 2022 and specifically the event, the in-person event that's happening at Apple Park. And so there is a special page on the developer site with the URL /WWDC22/special-day. But anyways, on that page it says, we're hosting a special all-day experience at Apple Park on June 6th to kick off WWDC 2022. Gather with others in the developer community to watch the keynote and State of the Union videos alongside Apple engineers and experts. Explore the all-new Developer Center and so much more. We can't wait to connect in person. I'm sorry, all-new Developer Center? What?
Explore it. Let's explore our desks.
And then one of you, I presume John, put this link in the show notes that I completely missed when it flew by, which was apparently this time last year. And this is a link to Mac Rumors, and it says Apple's building Developer Center at Apple Park campus. And in this, it says that Apple is working to build a dedicated developer center on its Apple Park campus, Apple fellow Phil Schiller said today during his testimony in the ongoing Epic versus Apple trial. Schiller did not provide additional detail on the developer center and has not been previously announced by Apple, so little information is available at this time. Again, that was a year ago. So I don't know what this is about, and we can come back to that in just a moment, but moving right along to the actual details about this event that's happening in next month. Attending this event is free and open to members of the Apple Developer Program and Apple Developer Enterprise Program. Invitations will be allocated through a random selection process and are non-transferable. This sounds exactly like WWDC, actually. Submit your request between May 9th at 9 Pacific to May 11th at 9 Pacific. You'll be notified of your status by May 12th at 6 p.m. Pacific. It requires a negative COVID-19 test no more than 3 days before the event. Masks are currently optional. We'll provide details on the latest requirements to attendees prior to the event. One thing I would love to know, and I think James Thompson pointed this out, Where is this happening? Like, is this an indoor thing? Because that would make me very. I'm not going to sign up regardless. But like, if this was if I was going, if this is an indoor thing, I don't know about that. If it's an outdoor thing, hey, I think I can handle that. So, what do we think of this event? What do we think of this developer center thing? What do we think?
I wonder if the developer center is like a trap. Like, so the reason I pulled out this story from May, right?
For what?
It's like, oh. It's like developers check in, but they don't check out. I don't know. Like, yes, it's the Developer Re-Education Center. I know. I like this quote from the Mac Rumors thing of saying, that Schiller talked about it in the trial. I mean, you know why they bring it up in the trial? It's like Apple would be like, "What do you mean? We love developers. In fact, we're building a developer center right now." And as the quote said, has not been previously announced, so little information is available at this time. That was May 2021. Well, I can tell you right now in May 2022, little information is available at this time. What the heck is the developer center? Presumably it's like a bunch of machines and like you can go, it's like, imagine like WWDC labs, right? But on Apple's campus, where a place where developers are allowed to go. So it's no secret Apple stuff there. You go in there, you bring your laptop and your app, and there's a bunch of, Apple engineers there to help you with your app, or whatever you need help with. You need help with UI design, you need help with a particular API, just like WWDC Labs, except a dedicated little room for it in Apple Park, cordoned off from everything else. That's my best guess at what the developer center would be. But they didn't say. But, you're going to be here in person. We're going to watch videos. All right, sure, whatever. We're going to explore the developer center. I don't know what that means. And so much more. They can't wait to connect in person, even if you're not vaccinated and aren't wearing a mask, which seems ill-advised to me, especially since this is a lottery. And like, honestly, how many people can they let there? It's not like they're going to have 10,000 people at Apple Park, right? It's going to be a small number of people. It seems, I don't know. I still feel like this entire thing is kind of ill-advised, but
yep.
That's what they're choosing to do. It's a small in-person gathering of potentially maskless, potentially unvaccinated people who 3 days in the past did not test positive. I don't know. Well, we'll see. But I find the developer center somewhat intriguing.
Yeah, there's so much that we don't know here. And I think, we say that, we got an update from Apple about this whole thing, but the update really only added new questions. It's like an episode of Lost. It's like, all right, well, now we know a little bit more about it, but now we have these new questions of what's the developer center and why no masks? Like, I just, this whole thing is baffling to me. and I do still wonder, as you said, John, they're certainly incurring some degree of COVID risk here by having this event. And while it's probably going to be a low risk, generally speaking, compared to, worse scenarios that could exist in worse seasons and worse places, it still doesn't really seem like it's worth the risk to have an event at all right now if it's going to be so limited and still, bear some risk. It's like, I feel like either have WWDC or don't, but I don't know. I could be wrong. I mean, maybe this is just going to be the way forward indefinitely for WWDC. They've had the issue that we've talked about before, how, they made it remote or, online only for the last couple of years, and they accidentally made it too good, and they spoiled us. And now we realize that actually this is better for most people most of the time. And it's better for all people in certain ways. And so maybe this is the new kind of compromise of like, okay, well, we still are going to have some kind of in-person component for those who want it, but it's not going to be the full conference in person the way it used to be. And so we'll see what that means. Again, I still have so many questions about how this actually works in practice. And what is the developer center even? What are their plans for that? I mean, I'm sure that got derailed by COVID, but what do they plan for that to be? Who gets access? What does it take to get access? What do you have access to once you get there? Is it going to be like labs that are open year round? That's kind of awesome if that's what it is, and that's kind of what it sounds like it might be. So we'll see. There's so much unknown, and Apple keeps dropping like one sentence at a time of what this thing even is, what this event is, and it's hilarious that like when they drop these sentences here and there, they act as though we all already know.
Yeah,
and I'm sure they know what they're doing, but still, like it's just kind of funny. Like they're like, oh yeah, they'll preview the new developer center, and everyone's like, wait, record scratch, what? Like,
And then you dig up the Mac the article from Mac Rumors from May of last year. I mean, obviously, like doing the PR drip is a common strategy of releasing a little piece of information at a time, and also like Apple probably doesn't know the details of exactly what it's doing at this point because they always plan this stuff at the last minute. They probably know more than they're saying, but it's the combination of those two things. But it gets us to talk about it again because they revealed a little bit more information. But still, my main overriding sense about this thing is it's weird that they're doing anything in person at this particular time. I don't oppose the strategy of having a limited in-person thing combined with a mostly online thing. I think that's great. And especially if they have a developer center that's always there or more accessible, that all makes sense too. But the details of this particular event at this particular time seem strange to me, and I continue to question who's going to be super enthusiastic about going to this and who's going to be super enthusiastic about being the Apple people at this. You know what I mean? Like, because there have to be Apple, presumably there's other Apple people at the developer center, unless it is just like one tour guide walking you through backwards, like Casey at Virginia Tech saying, and here's a developer center.
Nice pull.
Were you actually able to use the developer center? This is where you would sit and get help. But anyway, let's continue on.
So let me be serious and then let me be silly for a minute. I remember when the Apple Watch first came out that a lot of developers that were considering, potentially publicly considering writing Apple Watch apps, they quietly got whisked off to San Francisco or Cupertino or whatever, and were able to bring their code and run it against not yet released Apple Watches. And I only ever heard this through the grapevine, and I don't know that this is true, but I'm pretty sure it's true. And
it was a public program.
Oh, was it? Okay. I wasn't sure if it was public.
Yeah, well, there were there's two stages to like pre-release hardware stuff. There's like before it's even announced, certain Apple might approach certain developers to say, hey, can you make us a demo for our new hardware that we can show off during the keynote? That's a very, very small group that's kept very under wraps with lots of limitations on how they even see the hardware. How, like, it's usually in big boxes, it's guarded, like it's a whole thing. Whereas between when something's been announced to the public and when it's available to the public, sometimes you get more access. And in the case of the Apple Watch, what happened was they announced it. I believe it was like a few months before it was going to be available, something like that, right? And so there was a big gap between announcement and availability.
Yeah,
and so
there was.
So during that time, they actually launched a program for developers to apply to have this pre-release access, so that you could go. It was already announced and shown to the public, so you didn't have to worry about breaking the secret of this thing existing. And if you were accepted to this program, you would go and you say they whisked them there. No, the developers had to pay to whisk themselves there.
Well, right, fair. That's a good point.
But yeah, so if you were accepted, you would have like one day. You'd be like, okay, well, you could be here during this one day, and you'll have access to the hardware. And be able to bring your app already mostly done from the simulator, and you can run it on the actual hardware and make tweaks for one day, and then see you later. So that's what was happening, and I don't know if that has happened in any other way for anything else they've done in recent history.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, but I'm thinking of that, and I'm wondering if that's one of the uses of the developer center is to be able to have a specific place to well, I was going to say bring people, but to have people arrive at. Yes. and let them play with something. And then it got me thinking, and this is where I'm getting a little bit silly. What if this is all in preparation for the supposedly forthcoming AR glasses? Like, what if this is, I'm sure it's going to be used for other things too, but what if this is in large part to prepare a space, or prepare the way even, you could say, for developers to come and use AR glasses and test their presumably simulator or whatever driven code on actual hardware? Like, I could see a world in which that's what this is about.
It's just a room full of AR tables.
Yeah, just empty blank tables.
No, right? like big places for you to be able to walk around and not bump into things. I mean, speaking of this, by the way, like the latest, these rumors, whatever. The latest round of rumors I heard was that Apple was planning to do the AR stuff at this WWDC, but it got pushed. But we'll see.
I mean, that's been the rumor for every WWDC for the the last 3 years.
I mean, so far it's been true. Yeah.
I even remember like the last one they had in person. I remember like I was in the room for that one with you guys, I believe, and I remember like the before before the keynote started, they have, the screen showing the little animations of whatever. And the animations they were showing looked very much like they would be the style of something drawn for AR glasses. It was almost like those like laser portraits in the 80s, but like forming shapes. You know what I mean? Like everything was made out of lightsabers.
Oh, yeah.
Like it was that kind of style. And even I remember looking at that thinking, oh my God, are they about to do the AR thing right now? Because that sure look like that art style sure looks like it. And it turns out it was just, that was just the art style for the year. It meant nothing. It was just what they thought looked cool.
It was like a virtual boy.
Yeah.
Getting ready. I don't know. Yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean, I'm enthusiastic about this for other people. It's one of those things like, would you hire this person for your team? No, but I'd hire them for that team over there. I think this is an interesting way for Apple to dip their toe in the water. Personally, for me, I am not in love with the idea of getting on an airplane yet, much less, going to a place where a bunch of people are milling about, potentially indoors, potentially without masks. Like, that's not my jam. But if it's your jam, like, feel free. And I'm very, very excited to see pictures, people will be allowed to share anyway, pictures and information about how this goes down. But we'll see. All right, our friend Jason, friend of the show, Jason, had something to talk about with regard to the Apple Studio display and settings. And Jason lamented in Macworld, in his periodic column in Macworld, that it would be cool if we had settings for the Studio Display webcam. Wouldn't that be interesting? So Jason writes, we can debate the wisdom of putting center stage on a display, most likely designed for the desks of nerds, but let's leave that aside. Actually, I would like to talk about that briefly. I stand by. I love center stage, and I think this is a reasonable application of it. I think I'm the only one, or maybe Jason was saying the same thing.
No, I agree with you. I think center stage is good here. It's just they need a camera that is capable of doing center stage and not also looking like crap.
Agreed. So anyway, back to what Jason wrote.
By the way, the update to the firmware still looks like crap, right? We all are in agreement on that?
Yeah, some people say it's getting slightly better, but that's why I put this article in here, because I think Jason really nailed the heart of how Apple's traditional ethos hurts it, makes it more difficult for Apple to get out from under this bad hardware that it has chosen to put in its display.
Right. So continuing with what Jason wrote, how about the audacity of Apple shipping it without any interface to speak of? And how much better might the camera on the Studio Display have been received if it could be tweaked by its users to produce more pleasing images? The Studio Display users are reporting that occasionally the Studio Display's audio speakers or microphones or both get a little choppy. Again, this is me interjecting. That is absolutely factual. Occasionally, the speakers will have, I don't even know how to describe it, but they'll have like just a few milliseconds where there's no audio. It's enough that you notice, but not enough that it's extremely jarring. And then occasionally, and this happened to me today, I was listening to a podcast using Overcast on the Mac, and I don't think this was Overcast. I think it was the display. I'll be listening to something, and I'll go, and it'll just freeze like that for a while. And eventually, and what makes me think it was the display is eventually it stopped. And then when I adjusted the volume just to see if anything was working, because I turned back on the pops when you adjust the volume, the boop boop boops. Well, anyways, when I did that, I heard it on my clamshelled MacBook Pro. So even though the sound settings last I had touched it were set to the Studio Display, suddenly after the MacBook Pro is what was actually emitting sound. And then I went back in System Preferences, moved it back to the Studio Display, and everything was fine. It was very weird, though. So yeah, a little bit of audio problems are definitely happening from time to time. Anyway, back to Jason. The Studio Display's audio speakers or microphones or both get a little choppy. That's a common problem with audio hardware in the Mac, but it's fixed by the classic tech problem solver. Turn it off and back on. Except the Studio Display does not have a button. If the audio on the Studio Display gets weird, your only option is to crawl onto your desk, pull the plug, and then plug it back in. All true. All very true.
See, and that's because, as we noted before, you can't even pull the power cord out of the back of your monitor. You can if you really want to pull really hard, but that's not supposed to be pulled out. It's not a regular connector. It is really well wedged in there, and it's not the type of connector that they want you connecting and disconnecting. So even though technically you can yank the cord out, you really shouldn't. And so because it doesn't have a power button, because why would you ever need a power button, right, Apple? You have to go and crawl into your desk and find where it's plugged in and unplug it, right? So these two things, like, the typical Apple ethos, you don't need a power button because why would you ever need one? It's just smart enough to know when to turn on and smart enough to know when to turn off. You don't need to worry about it. that fails you when it turns out actually sometimes you do need to turn it off because there are bugs. And then the total lack of settings, right? A lot of webcams have, and you can read the article, see this, there have been third-party apps in the past that have let you tweak the image of your Apple built-in camera. And then, of course, third-party cameras you often come with their own app where you can tweak the brightness, the contrast, the exposure, the focal distance, all sorts of these things that maybe you could fiddle with to make the image of yourself in center stage look more pleasing to you. Like you said in past shows, a lot of the complaints about the center stage camera, aside from the low resolution, is that there is like some over processing that really smooths out presumably the noise in your face, and it's like low contrast and overexposed. And so the over processing, if you could disable the processing or weaken it, that might help. But simple things like exposure, right, and contrast, those are basic settings that a lot of webcams have, and it could just be that people would be happier if they could just have two sliders to mess with those things to make it look more like it does on the iPad. Again, nothing's going to save the hardware. Like a lot of people who are frustrated by the Studio Display are getting third-party webcams or taking like a point-and-shoot digital camera or a mirrorless camera or whatever, and those just look fantastically better. So, there's no substitute for cubic inches, but
nice.
With the existing hardware that's there, some amount of settings might have actually saved Apple from this, because the only alternative people have now is as far as I know, there's no third-party apps that you can mess with this internal camera with. And people are just waiting around for new, beta versions of macOS that come with slightly tweaked firmware, which again, you can't change. The only setting you have is basically, should I do center stage or not? Jason also mentioned if you could select how big of a crop it takes, another setting that Apple just doesn't give you. Although Apple changes it from beta to beta, there's not like they give you a setting of like, how big do you want the crop to be? And that could also help you be happier with your camera. So lack of settings, it's a known thing with Apple. And when there is a problem, the lack of settings, as we've discussed in the past, when troubleshooting things, really makes it so the user has no recourse except for just to wait around and hope Apple fixes their problem.
For what it's worth, the LG Ultrafine also has no buttons whatsoever, which is also kind of annoying.
Honestly, they would just screw them up.
Probably true.
It's better for LG to attempt fewer things because they obviously can't do even the basics correctly.
Oh, as a quick aside, speaking of screwing up buttons, did you guys see, I'm not going to be able to find the website while we were talking, but I'll put a link in the show notes. Did you see the new, the thing about the mechanical watches? This was posted in a Slack we're all in.
I think I still have it open with
my
Windows. I haven't finished going through it, so it's still in a browser window. I will have it for you in a second. Here you go.
Yeah, I got it.
Putting in the chat room.
I'm not going to try to pronounce this name because I'm not going to do it any justice. But this is a website that this person does some phenomenal live animations of things and mechanical engineering and discusses like how things work. If I recall correctly, the same person did an absolutely brilliant version on the internal combustion engine. This is so cool. And to see, like, I knew a little teeny tiny bit about how a mechanical watch worked, but this is one of those things where you literally build a mechanical, well, not literally, I shouldn't say, but you effectively build a mechanical watch from first principles and from nothing into a fully functioning watch with a complication, the whole rigmarole. Marco, if you haven't read this already, this is straight up your alley. This is super cool. But yeah, with regard to the display, like for my personal needs, the camera doesn't really bother me that much. Like, of course, I wish it was better, but I'm not sitting on Zoom calls all day long. If I was sitting on Zoom calls all day long, this would really tick me off. Like center stage is awesome, and it works. I tried it with, I think it was with Zoom, and it did work with Zoom. And I stand by center stage. I think it's you, John, me, and I think Jason also did as well, if memory serves. But we might be the only ones that, there are dozens of us. We might be the only ones that are enthusiastic about it. But nevertheless, I still think center stage is a perfectly reasonable application, or it's perfectly reasonable on the Studio Display. And for my uses, I'm not too bothered by all this, but golly, if I was sitting on Zoom all day, every day, this would really, really, really frustrate me. Moving on, we can't go another episode without talking about Elon Musk, apparently. So we had some feedback. I don't want to read this person's name just in case that would get them in trouble, but we had some feedback, and it is as follows. It's a little bit long, but it's fascinating. I'm one of the attorneys suing Elon Musk for his delayed disclosure of his stake in Twitter. John suggested that it was good that some probably rich shareholder was taking this on. It's not actually how our system works, generally speaking. Our firm does plaintiff-side securities litigation because the SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission, cannot or will not take on so much wrongdoing. The laws and the courts have left it to the private sector to enforce security laws through private civil lawsuits. The plaintiff in our case actually sold very few Twitter shares, a lot of money for him, but not a lot of money in the scheme of things. There's a system, and the attorneys who will ultimately lead the case will be the ones to represent the investor who lost the most money and wants to serve as lead. That may or may not be us. We take all our cases for securities fraud and other security law violations on contingency and at risk, and get paid a percentage of a recovery if we are successful. This model may not be ideal, but it's the system we have. Contingency class action lawyers are often maligned, and I agree with much of the criticism, millions of dollars of fees for the lawyers, when the injured class members get a coupon in the mail for 10% off another product from the company that wronged them. Our cases don't settle for coupons. The class usually gets around 75% of any recovery we ultimately obtain. The security laws are written in such a way that there aren't any punitive damages, so recoveries are often not 100%. But I feel great about what I do, both because of the recoveries we are able to get for the classes we represent and for the hopefully deterrent effect we have in the markets. Unfortunately, in Elon's case, I don't think the system can provide much of a deterrent because there's no amount of money that will cause him to lose sleep. But that doesn't mean he's above the law, and hopefully we'll get a chance to remedy that for those who sold their shares too cheaply when he was hiding his stake. It's fun to hear my case discussed, sorry Marco, even for just a few seconds. In a prior life, I used to defend Apple in privacy-related class actions, so I guess it isn't the first time. I just thought that was all super interesting, so thank you to that anonymous person.
Yeah, it's interesting that the one he's representing is not some super rich shareholder, but obviously they're working. They said we don't make money unless we win, and they get it's not like class action like you said, but he described it well. With a handful of lawyer gets millions of dollars, and the class gets some pittance. But it is actually similar because if they get a percentage, if they're representing someone who had millions and millions of losses, they're going to get back 75% of their million, and that means the lawyers get 25% of that million back. So anyway, I guess they don't get anything if they lose. I mostly agree that it is good that someone's trying to, hold him account for doing a thing that he ostensibly wasn't supposed to do. It's kind of sad that this is supposed to be against the law and you're not supposed to do it according to this, or whatever, against the rules of the SEC that are supposed to govern business in the United States. But you can just flout those rules and just assume no one's going to come after you because apparently the SEC can't or won't. Kind of like how our IRS can't go after rich people because they don't have enough money to audit them because it's very expensive and time consuming to audit rich people because rich people have lots of lawyers and accountants and everything. So the IRS goes, we can't go after rich people. We'll just go after slightly less rich people who we can afford to pursue, which is a totally broken system. And in this case, it seems like the SEC is not interested in going after clear violations of their rules. And so they leave it to the private sector, quote unquote, where lawyers will take it up because if they can recover some of the money that people say that they lost because, again, he was hiding his stake in Twitter. And had people known that he was buying up all those shares, they would have acted differently, but they didn't. So they ended up losing money on stock. It seems like it's a difficult thing to prove, or at very least a difficult thing to, obviously you can't even get all your money back. You can get some percentage of your money back, but some percentage is better than zero. So we can just, if this succeeds, it will be added to the list of sort of slap on the wrist things that Elon has run afoul of. So when someone says Elon Musk has never done anything wrong, you can say, well, he has. He hasn't done anything wrong that has caused him to, as in the words of this, feedback, lose sleep. Like nothing has actually hurt him because when you're very wealthy, it's very difficult to have anything that hurts you. But has he ever done anything wrong? And provably wrong, like where everyone agrees he did a wrong thing and then he got either convicted or sued and lost or whatever. Yeah, sure, happens all the time. I mean, we'll see what happens with, for example, all the discrimination lawsuits in the Tesla factories or whatever, and add that to the column of things that probably don't, make a difference in the grand scheme of things to Elon Musk personally, but never let it be said that he has never done anything wrong and is the blameless angel that some of our listeners may believe he is.
All right, I wanted to channel upstream and do cover a couple of quick things that I thought were super interesting. Over the last couple of weeks, there's been rumors that Sunday Ticket might be coming to Apple TV Plus. Marco, could you describe to me what Sunday Ticket is, please?
Yes, you are going for a drive on the weekend, and you go a little bit too fast, and an officer of the law prevents you from going further and gives you a piece of paper that makes you pay money.
I'm kind of annoyed at how good an answer that was. That is not at all close to what it actually means, but that was an annoyingly good answer. Well done, sir. So Sunday Ticket is a thing for American football. It used to be for years, and as it stands, still is, for years and years and years and years. The only way you could get access to, with exceptions, any NFL football game was to pay an obscene amount of money to a particular cable provider. And it's actually not cable, it's satellite provider. So Dish Network, which has had other names in the past, had a exclusive deal with the NFL such that in order to get Sunday Ticket, and again, this is the thing that lets you watch whatever games you want, with exceptions, no matter where they are, and it had some other features too, like a channel that showed only the super exciting plays in football, because as much as I do love football, let's be honest, it's kind of boring. I'm sorry, it's DirecTV, not Dish. Thank you, CMF. But anyways,
you're going to anger so many people. This is going to be fantastic. I can't wait.
I love football, even though I shouldn't, but nevertheless, let's be honest.
It's just a quick aside, because I don't know what you're talking about for the most part, but just a quick aside. You mentioned it lets you watch like some of the games. Well, most of the games. Well, the feeling I get, and maybe I could be wrong. I don't know anything about sports. I'm probably wrong, but it seems like the leagues really hate the fans. Like they hate you.
That's factual.
They absolutely hate you. All the crap they make you go through to have subpar experiences and so many limits, and I know why. I know it's because of basically large money deals between large companies.
Yeah, they don't hate the fans; they just love money.
Right, but it seems like they hate you so much. Like I'm just. Again, maybe it's just me and my lack of like a traditional father growing up, and that's why I'm not into sports at all. But I don't understand why people would care so much to get through all this crap. Meanwhile, I'm buying Apple products and putting up all their software bugs and everything. So maybe a bad example.
Just think of how much you went through back in the day to watch the QuickTime 4 streaming video from WWDC. You would have gone through a lot to do that, and people are willing to do exactly that much. Think of our friend that we know who has a sling box in the Midwest to view sporting events on the other side of the world. Like, we would totally do that if that's what we needed to do to be able to see WWDC keynote live. So I don't think we have any sort of high ground to stand on here.
I suppose that's true.
And by the way, it's not a Slingbox. It's prior sponsored channels, which is excellent. But anyways, I take your point, Marco, and it's exactly what John said. It's not necessarily that they hate the fans, although in some cases I think that's kind of true. But it's more that they want money more than anything else in the world. And they make these ridiculous deals with anyone who gets near them about, we can show this game in these areas, in these markets, but not that market, and not when it's too close to home, and so on and so forth. It's a mess.
Yeah, they want to sell exclusive rights, because you make money by saying we will sell you this, and it's valuable because you will be the exclusive rights holder to air this type of game and for this team in this area or whatever. And the exclusivity makes it valuable, and the exclusivity means now all of a sudden there's a bunch of rules about what you can show on like the blanket streaming service or in their app or whatever. It's like, well, we have this, so it's just, it's how they make money, right? And sometimes it's a huge amount of money, and sometimes these are weird legacy deals, and they'll slowly fade out. I'm sure, listen to someone talking to a sporting podcast about how the age of streaming is changing the landscape of local television contracts and blackouts and all that other stuff. But still, stuff like that changes slowly. And in the end, there is value inherent in the sporting events because people want to see them. And it's just a question of who is going to, how much money that value is going to make and for whom. And so I think the total amount of money it's going to make is probably going to stay the same, but that money is going to move around. I bet sports fans are hoping that by the end, there is a simpler way as a fan to give the amount of money required for you to see the things you want to see. Right now, it seems anything but simple because we seem like we're in this in-between period of, cable and streaming services and over-the-air live TV all in the mix. And I don't know how people even keep it straight of, how they have to watch a thing. But, then again, it's like that for streaming TV. That's why things like Just Watch exist. The Just Watch app and whatever it is, justwatch.com. It's literally the second place I go. First place is what am I going to watch? Second place is how do I watch that? And I just go to Just Watch and say, Just Watch, please tell me how I can watch this. And then it tells me of the umpteen services I've subscribed to. Here are the different ways you can watch it. That's not an app I needed when I was a kid and I had 13 channels.
Right.
Yeah, it's so true. And this is all relevant because and the NFL wouldn't sell you. The NFL had a streaming product years and years and years ago. Before that was super duper popular, the NFL had a streaming product, and I'm sure like the baseball people say, "Oh, baseball was first." It doesn't matter. But the point is, years ago, it had a streaming product, but you could only subscribe to it if you were not American. And if you entered American contact information or came to the NFL website from America, they would say, kindly pound sand and pay DirecTV. So a friend of the show, Lex Friedman, many moons ago, and this website is now gone from the internet, but many moons ago, he put up a post that said, hey, you can pay a company to give you a DNS server that's way off in Europe. And that was all you needed in order to get the NFL to serve you the European page. And then you could pay the NFL like $150 to get Sunday Ticket via streaming, but you had to masquerade as a European to do it. And it was a total mess. Well, anyways, all of this to say, yes, I totally understand, Marco, why this seems bananas to you, and you're not really wrong. But Sunday Ticket may be coming to Apple TV Plus, which would be wild and I think a huge deal because a lot of Americans, myself included, although I mostly don't pay attention to the NFL anymore, a lot of Americans really love American football and the NFL. And for Sunday Ticket to be available via streaming would be a big deal. And maybe it is already on DirecTV and I misunderstand it, but my understanding is you cannot get Sunday Ticket without being a DirecTV member. And yes, I would presume that you wouldn't be able to get Sunday Ticket in this potential new world unless you're an Apple TV Plus member, but that is a much easier thing to do than putting a satellite dish on your friggin' house. So I just think this is fascinating. Even though I don't pay attention to the NFL, I still think it would be super cool if Sunday Ticket came to Apple TV Plus. And I know they're doing the Friday night baseball games and they're kind of dipping their toe in the water of sports stuff. So I really, really am keeping a keen eye on this to see where it goes. And I think it's a fascinating play. And then additionally, very quickly, there was a rumor, or there's been a statement, actually. This is from the Register Citizen, which is a paper that I don't remember ever hearing about before. But apparently, Apple TV Plus has commissioned a movie on the Danbury Trashers. And you might say, well, what in the hell are the Danbury Trashers? So the story of me driving a family friend's Ferrari. The family friend was the owner of the Danbury Trashers minor league hockey team. And this you may have heard about many, many years ago in the early aughts, because he then made his then 17-year-old son the general manager of the Danbury Trashers minor league hockey team. And so there was a documentary done about this. It is on Netflix. It is excellent. It is called Untold: Crime and Penalties. And I will put that link in the show notes. I would watch it again, but I just canceled my Netflix subscription, but that's neither here nor there.
Oh, what?
But either way, so there's a documentary about this. It's like an hour and a half, and it's excellent. And then I talked about all this on Analog because, this guy, Jimmy Galante, he was in the garbage business, hence Danbury Trashers. He was very Italian.
Had a lot of money from the garbage business, and he was an Italian from New Jersey. Okay.
And he went to jail for tax evasion for a while. You can I'll let you put the in between together. But he was always super nice to me.
Beating us over the head with it.
Yeah. He was always super nice to me and let me drive his Ferrari once, and that was pretty cool. So anyway, I just thought this was fascinating, and this is a little bit selfish, but I think it's super interesting and neat. And apparently, one of the stars of what is this? Stranger Things. This gentleman's name is David Harbour. He's going to play the aforementioned Jimmy Galante. So it hits close to home. It was super weird watching this documentary and seeing their kitchen and being like, wow, I've stood in that kitchen many times before. Like, this is really weird and creepy. But anyways, I just thought that was fascinating.
I will say, too, while we're on TV for a moment, in a failed effort to find anything else to watch for the moment, Tiff and I decided to just start watching Severance again.
Yeah, I was just talking to Aaron about this.
What do you mean again? I thought you already had started. Did you start over again?
Yeah, so we finished the season. That right now they're between seasons.
Oh, you're watching it a second time now.
Yeah,
okay.
So we're going back and rewatching season 1, and we're only a couple episodes in, but there is so much to pick up on a second watch through. So if you enjoyed season 1, and if you don't, what's wrong with you? But if you enjoyed season 1, I strongly suggest go back and watch it again, like while it's still fresh in your mind. And there's so much there that you will pick up the second time. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I would recommend that for you as well, John. But I hear that you didn't like Severance at all.
Wait, I haven't heard the episode yet. Saving it for a long drive tomorrow.
I'm actually watching it a second time, because I'm watching it with a wife. I'm going through it. But yeah, the frustrating thing that annoys everybody that I'll say again, so all you and all the listeners can also be annoyed, is a lot of the things that Mark was picking up on the second time were possible to also pick up the first time.
Mm-hmm.
If you were paying attention.
Not all of us are as smart and observant as you, John. I'm sorry.
That's not about being smart and observant, actually. What it is, and this is why Marco is ill-equipped to deal with it, is experience watching similar programs, right? It's basically like, do you know the tropes? Do you know how things are normally telegraphed? When you see X, like, I don't want to spoil anything, but they're like, what they do in the, like, previously on, right? When they do the previously on.
Oh, yeah. I never watch those because they spoil too much.
Right.
Yeah,
so
but
the reason they do the previously on, like I think on episode 8 or 9, they do a previously on that reminds you of something that was in episode 1 or 2, because they assume most people have forgotten by now about episode 1 or 2, or the thing that they are showing you previously on wasn't noteworthy to people because they're not familiar with the tropes. But if you've seen lots of shows like this, when it happened in episode 1 or 2, you go, oh, that probably means that X and Y are going to happen. And then when X and Y do happen, and it's not about being observant or being smart. It's just like, how many shows like this have you watched before? And for Marco, that number is usually 0, right? Unless he's watching a sitcom, right? So that's why, it's not a character judgment, and it's not because Marco wasn't paying attention and he was on his phone or whatever. It is just simply like, how many similar shows like this have you seen before?
Yeah. I was just talking to Aaron and my parents about this, and my dad or my mom and dad had just finished Severance for the first time, and Dad was like, man, I got to watch it again. And I was like, I was thinking about this too, and Aaron and me and Dad were talking about this. I feel like I do need to do a rewatch, because I really enjoy, we don't need to go into this much more. I really enjoyed it. I don't know if I enjoyed it quite as much as everyone around me enjoyed it, but I definitely enjoyed it a lot. And I feel like I missed a lot, and I need to go through it one more time.
And the best kind of rewatch, my favorite kind of rewatch, is the kind I'm doing where I get to introduce the show to someone who hasn't seen it, having watched it and liked it, and I could say to my wife, I like the show and I think you'll like it too, which are not always the same thing, but in this case, I think you'll like it too, and then to be able to take her through with it and then refuse to answer her questions when she asks me, because I don't want to spoil anything.
I'm pretty sure, John, that Merlin said that you didn't like it.
That's not what I heard.
All right, let's talk iPhone 14 display panels. There's been a picture leaked that purports to have the iPhone 14, 14 Pro, 14 Max, and 14 Pro Max all arrayed. And it is, well, other than way too many words and way too many names, way too many numbers, it looks like about what everyone's been saying it's going to look like. So the iPhone, let me paint you a word picture. The iPhone 14 Pro and 14 look to be approximately the same size. The 14, the non-Pro, appears to have the traditional notch, whereas the 14 Pro has, what are we calling this? The pill and something? The pill and lozenge? Is that right?
The sideways eye.
A sideways eye is actually a pretty good description. No, it's not a pill. The hole in...
No, that's not what people are going to call it, but it looks like a little stylized letter I on its side.
Yeah. And then the 14 Max and 14 Pro Max, I think they're the same size. But again, the 14 Max, the notch, the 14 Pro Max, the sideways eye, sideways lowercase I. And again, this is around the time of year that we would see fairly accurate leaks. To my eye, this looks accurate, but I'm no expert on these sorts of things. And this is about what we'd expect. I'm intrigued that the Pro models are the only ones that go notch and hole, or whatever we're calling it, the side eye. But one way or another, this looks like it smells like it's probably true to me.
Yeah, all the iPhones always leak. They leak. Everything leaks. It's impossible to keep it. These are real parts, I'm sure. We've got everything about it. This is leaked. We've got the hole. We've got what the case looks like. We've got what the cameras look like. We've got some specs on them. Obviously, we don't have the colors, but we've got probably the names. We don't have the prices. But anyway, the reason I thought this particular leak was fun was because these phones, especially in a year when there's not going to be a quote-unquote redesign, which basically means they change the sides and the back, these phones are so sort of defined by looking at the face of them, like that this one part, which is just like the cover glass or whatever, if you see that, you've seen the whole phone basically, right? Because you know, what is it going to be? It's going to be a rectangle that's going to be that big, and it's going to have these features on the screen, which is kind of what we're interested in terms of like, is it full screen? How big is the notch? What else is there? And then there'll be a phone behind that, right? And what will it look like? Well, it'll look like your current one. It's got a flat sides, it's got a flat back. It'll come in a bunch of different colors or whatever, right? And then obviously what's inside it really counts, like what processors, the specs on the camera. Oh, of course, that also leaks in separate rumors. But this one little part is such a sort of It's like, yep, this is what the next set of phones are going to look like. And the reason I thought this was interesting is because despite all the rumors of us talking about, we talked about this on past shows, like the little hole punched out for the camera and the slightly longer hole for the Face ID sensors versus the notch or whatever. One thing that really stands out when you see, the parts sitting in front of you is a thing that a lot of the rumors had mentioned, but it's more visceral when you see it, is that the little, we'll put the link in the show notes so you can see the image, but if you don't know, it's like a circular cutout and then like a lozenge shape next to it, as opposed to the notch, right? Because the circular cutout and the lozenge are near the top of the display where the notch would be, but there's screen between them and the top of the phone. Unlike the notch, there's no screen between the notch and the top of the phone. The notch is the top of the phone. The screen ends, the notch begins, and that's it. In this thing, if you're going up the middle of the phone, you hit the lozenge, and then you hit some more screen, and then you hit the top of the phone. So I'm not sure of the exact measurements, but it looks to me like it's possible that the little lozenge thing is lower on the screen than the notch.
Yeah, it does look like that from this picture. It could just be a weird perspective trick, but I think it does look like it's a little bit lower.
And so you get more pixels of lit up screen, but some of those pixels are on the other side of the lozenge. And like if the lozenge is blocking part of your video, if you turn it landscape and you're watching some video and the lozenge is blocking it, the notch blocks video sometimes too, right? But the lozenge would block the video, and then you'd also be able to see a little bit of the video on the other side of the lozenge. And I do wonder, I know this is the Pro models, only the Pro models have this. Only the more expensive ones will have the lozenge. And I'm wondering, you get more lit up pixels numerically on the Pro ones, but would you prefer to have the smaller notch from the non-Pro or the lozenge? And I'm looking at this and I'm wondering if I wouldn't rather have the notch, just because it might intrude less far into the content. You know what I mean?
Yeah, this does not immediately appeal to me very much because, what the notch effectively becomes is a status bar. Like this is just where we shove the status bar, which wasn't exactly useful space before for, full color, full width stuff. Before it was a black bar. And, you'd have stuff on the sides and maybe a little thing in the middle, and that would be it. Like, the clock would be in the middle or whatever. And they just, they rearranged the status bar when they brought the notch into things, and they just shoved the stuff on the sides, and that was kind of it. And so we didn't really lose much. Similar, see also when they added the notch to the MacBook Pro last year, that, where the notch covers in the MacBook Pro is just usually a blank part of the menu bar. And so we weren't really losing any useful screen space by that. It doesn't really matter, right? And so on the iPhone, same thing. It's like they rearrange the status bar to work around it. It's fine. To then try to change from the notch to this weird hole punch thing, are we actually really gaining anything from that besides it looks cooler? Now, that being said, it looking cooler is a major reason why they might want to do this, because the hole punch style is already occurring in the Android world. That does, I think, look slightly more modern. And so to have a visual differentiation, especially for their Pro models, that does make sense. I see why they're doing it. But from a utility point of view, I don't see how that helps us, with the exception that I will get to see a little bit more blue at the top of my screen, from my wallpaper on the lock screen. That's I'll see a little bit more sky.
Well, it's narrower than the notch too. It seems like, so you get a little bit in terms of content. It's a little for the status bar, for example, up there in the ears, where the ears of the notch are. There's a little bit more space, and then it also means when you're, I'm thinking of losing landscape video. When you're in landscape mode and the content is trying to go to the edge of the phone, but there's either the notch or the lozenge there. The lozenge will cover less of it just because it's not as wide. But my main thing is okay, so it's not as wide, but if it is lower on the phone, that it is intruding farther into my content. Again, I'm sure this is mostly a non-issue because like the notch, we will eventually just get, notch blindness, add banner blindness, hole punch blindness. We will all just collectively, we learned this with the notch. We were worried about how it would be. We all got our phones with the notches. Now we just do not see it and think about it at all, right? I think that is universal, and I'm sure that will happen with this too. I'm just when you were getting at, Marco, I'm but is it actually any sort of upgrade, or is it just status quo? If you didn't have this, right? I guess the only upgrade is that it's easier to visually distinguish the more expensive phone. So whatever thrill you get from having the more expensive model is a little bit keener or something. And I don't even know if it looks cooler, because hole punch phones remind me of Android. They've had it for years and years and years. And so for me, it's not a status symbol. It's on the way towards, let's have a full screen phone, right? We're not there yet. Presumably we'll get there eventually, but not this year and probably not next year, but eventually iPhone 16 maybe, or whenever they go full screen. We talked about this when the notch came out. It's like Apple does not want the notch. It is a necessary evil. And the moment Apple can get rid of the notch, they will. Can't get rid of it yet. They've shrunk it and they've turned it into a lozenge, and eventually it will be gone entirely and we'll all be happy. But until they can get there, it's just keep pushing on the perimeter of that thing, and then we'll all just, we'll ignore it out of the corner of our eye and just, go on with our lives.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, though, like, having it look different and cooler and newer, even if the function is not that different, that is a major thing that Apple is always seeking and needs to seek. They have challenges getting people to upgrade their phones if their phones still work. And if Apple doesn't change much year to year, they get criticized for it. Like, oh, why does this phone look the same as my old one? Like so they do actually need things like this to keep moving the design forward, to keep appealing to people, and to look fresh and new. So even if all it is like a reshuffling of the existing trade-offs with a new shape that doesn't actually really give you that much extra, that is itself a valuable thing, because people will say, oh, look, they redesigned it. It looks fresh and new, So that I see why they're doing this if they can, but for actual utility, it won't matter too much, I don't think. But it will look cooler, temporarily.
Yeah, and that probably is, for all the tech nerdery that we talk about, that probably is one of the most important factors making a regular tech nerd enthusiast people get the Pro. We know that the Pro, according to the rumors, is going to have a totally different system on a chip that's going to be way better than the 14, because the plain 14 is going to have A15 and the 14 Pro is going to have the, or A15 and the 14 Pro is going to have the A16, right? But nobody cares about that except for us. Like that is a way bigger differentiating factor. If you wanted to say, what's the difference between the Pro and the Max? Well, the cameras are going to be different, but also an entirely different system on a chip, and the new one presumably is way better in a bunch of ways, right? But nobody cares about that. But everybody can see notch versus lozenge. And does it matter? Like we said, is there any practical benefit? No, but look, lozenge, and they tell me lozenge is better. So therefore, it's like that and colors are like so much more important to getting people to upgrade to the Pro than trying to explain to them that the number after the A on the system on a chip that people don't even have any concept of, it's one bigger on this one. This is a 16, that's a 15. What difference is it? Like with the sort of A/B test, put the two phones in people's hands and cover up the lozenge and let them swipe around. How long do you think it would take a regular human being, or us for that matter, to be able to tell one is an A16, one is an A15? Like you're never going to be able to tell looking at Safari, looking at you'd have to run a benchmark or maybe play a game with an FPS counter, because if you just play a game, it's so hard to tell, right? Or you'd have to use it all day. Like say the A16 has better battery life. Even though that is the differentiating factor of these phones, and the A15 is an existing chip that you can buy today, what people will probably care more about is lozenge versus notch.
Yeah, and I think when you look at this lineup, the other big piece of news here is that this pretty clearly is supporting the rumor for a while that there's going to be a quote low end Max, and I know this is all relative, right? These are all expensive phones. Apple doesn't really make a low end phone, but so they're going to have not only the regular 14, 14 Pro, and 14 Pro Max, but now they're also having a 14 Max that is not a Pro. So they're going to have two sizes with two families, and you'll have all four combinations of which pairing you want to get. And because they're moving to that, and I think it's fairly obvious to guess why they are doing that, because they will capture more of the market by having a large phone that is not super expensive. It's only regular expensive, which is as best as Apple can hope for. So there is market to capture there, and so I see why they are doing that. But this also being the year that they are more differentiating the Pro family from the non-Pro family, I think it's not a coincidence that they're adding that big non-Pro phone the same year the Pros are going to have a more differences between them and the non-Pros, and that goes from both the system on a chip that allegedly is happening, where they're only going to have the 16 and the 14s are going to keep the 15. This is getting very confusing. And also they're going to look visually different still. Now, I think personally, Apple overvalues the difference in materials used on the phone, because what they've done so far with the Pro phones, in recent years, is they have this stainless steel band, which makes it heavier, and they have the like textured glass back, which makes it more slippery to hold. So like the way they make the Pro phones look different from the non-Pro phones to date has made them physically worse phones by being both heavier and slipperier. And so maybe by taking a different method of, these screens are going to actually look different from the front. It's going to look very different. Maybe they can stop using the fingerprint magnet heavy stainless steel on the case band and maybe make it a little bit nicer of a phone to hold by maybe shedding some weight and making it a little more grippy.
I hope they don't get rid of the stainless steel. Yes, it is heavier, but it's not that much heavier, and I really do think it feels more expensive. It's like in luxury cars. You can do things to the control surfaces that don't make them any better, and in fact are probably heavier than the previous ones, but they feel more expensive. I love the feel of the because I used my stainless steel Pro phone without a case for as long as I could tolerate it, which wasn't that long, granted, but I think it feels great. It feels more expensive. Does it have any functional difference? No. Is it correct fingerprints? Yes, it does, but it feels so good. I love the stainless steel thing, and whatever. Like I don't think they're going to give that up, because they do want to visually differentiate the surfaces, and they probably do want to use a more expensive material. That's the whole point. It's like heavy AV equipment where they put lead weights in it. They just want it to feel more expensive, and in some ways, being a couple ounces heavier and having that stainless steel feel is that luxury feel they're going after. The slipperiness is harder to excuse, though. It's like, even if you really like a matte surface, how much are you going to like it when your phone falls out of your hand and breaks on the ground? So,
and everyone uses cases. I know.
Yeah, they need, but still, they should not make the Pro one slipperier. But I'm okay with it being a little bit heavier in exchange for the really cool stainless steel, because I think it's great.
We are brought to you this week by Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. You can stand out with a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything you want. Products, your content that you create, even your time, all with Squarespace, and it's super easy to use. So whether you're just making something simple, like a simple site for, a business, here's some info about your business, or maybe a blog or a portfolio site, you do all this stuff visually with all, visual drag and drop kind of tools. What you see is what you get live previewing, all that. So you don't have to do any kind of coding anywhere. There's no coding in Squarespace. It's fantastic. And they have great support if you need it, although honestly, you probably won't. It's great. And you don't have to worry about like hosting and software upgrades and stuff like that. And then Squarespace also has incredible options for businesses. They have things like member area support, custom templates, SEO tools, analytics, everything you might need to run a storefront online. So you can monetize your content, you can monetize your expertise, you can have these member areas that have gated content like videos or podcasts or courses or newsletters. And then you can sell your products, physical or digital goods, with Squarespace as well. They have all the tools you need to start selling your products online. They have SEO tools. They have a suite of integrated features and useful guides to help maximize prominence among search results. So it's just a great way to make a website for your business or any project you might need a website for. So go to squarespace.com/ATP for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use offer code ATP to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Once again, squarespace.com/ATP. When you're ready to go, use code ATP to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring our show.
All right, so let's do some Ask ATP. Andre Videla writes, is Casey still using Combine? If so, what is it like since it came out in 2019? How does it compare to RX Swift in practice? And what's the future of declarative or event-based frameworks on the platform? And have Marco and John tried them as well? So I do still use Combine, but relatively sparingly. So Combine is, I would argue, functional reactive programming. It's trying to embrace that, hey, things are going to happen asynchronously over time. Let's just make that a thing. Let's deal with that in an intelligent way. And what's great about Combine and RX Swift is that you can take something an event happening, and you can say, all right, well, out of this class that represents this event, I only care about this object, and then I want to do something with it, and this, that, and the other thing. And you can kind of transform these chains of events, or you can make these chains of functions that transform an input into an output and do something with it. And Combine lets you do this. ArcSwift lets you do this. A great example of this is using Notification Center. If you're an iOS developer, Notification Center is a way to pass messages, around your app. You can go. It's the kind of the global message bus that I feel like maybe it's a me thing, but like all developers eventually want a global message bus, and that's what Notification Center is. And Combine has a really great, or Notification Center has a really great Combine API for it, and where you can say, all right, when such and such a notification happens, give it to me, and then I'll do things with it. And that's a great example where I still use Combine. But I don't really let it take over my apps in the same way that I did with RxSwift. And that's largely because with RxSwift, it had a kind of a sub-project called RxCocoa, which gave you observables. That's kind of like publishers and Combine speak. But it gave you it gave you events when the things happen with Cocoa. So like when buttons were tapped, when things were scrolled, and so on and so forth. And Combine doesn't really touch Cocoa Touch. Like that's its own thing. Like it doesn't really touch UIKit. And there's good things about that. There's bad things about that. But because it doesn't really have an equivalent of RxCocoa, I don't use it near as much as I used RxSwift. And I think for the most part, that's probably okay. But I definitely do use it sometimes. Now, with regard to what's the future, I think it's pretty clear that async await is where Apple thinks the future is going. And where they're putting their efforts. And this has been made even more clear with the recent, just in the last month or two, release of Async Algorithms. And Async Algorithms is an open source package that's not part of the Swift like runtime or package, but it's stapled on the side of Swift, or optionally you can staple it on the side of Swift. And what it basically does is it fills in a lot of the gaps that Combine doesn't have on its own. Or excuse me, that async await doesn't have on its own. So it has operators like combine latest, join, zip, merge, things of that nature, and different ways of creating asynchronous sequences and things like that. And so this fills in a lot of the gaps that Combine was able to do that async await was not. And I haven't really played much with async algorithms yet, but it seems clear to me that for most use cases, in my opinion, I would start with async await, maybe paired with async algorithms, and then I would use Combine, not when I'm forced to, because obviously I'm never forced to, but only when that is really, truly, clearly the best available option. With all that said, I'm happy to honor questions if either you two fellas have any, but I'd love to ask. John, I mean, you're not really doing iOS development at the moment, so I assume you've not really touched Combine?
I haven't, and hearing you say all these things, and I also saw the async algorithms thing when it was announced. I'm wondering, what do you think this means for Combine? Is Combine gonna go away, and these are the replacements? Like, what is? It's so weird because Apple releases these things to the public, like, so there has to be, Combine has to exist because people wrote apps against it, right? So it has to be there for some period of time. But do you think this is a sign that Combine is out of favor at Apple, and they prefer to go with just, Swift UI, async await, and async algorithms instead?
Yes, asterisk. So I think you're absolutely right in your implication that Combine is kind of on life support, maybe going the way of the dodo. I think that's pretty clear, because since Combine landed in 2019, it's basically been crickets since then. The only thing that gives me pause about Combine really and truly going away, other than, a lot of people like me have embraced it, is that a lot of Swift UI is not a lot, but a not insignificant amount of Swift UI is leveraging Combine under the hood, like observable objects, for example, published properties, for example, things of that nature. And so they would need to revise their story and replace Combine in order to really and truly deprecate it, or replace it in the context of Swift UI to really and truly deprecate it. I think in the future, Apple's, star eye emoji is looking at async await and async algorithms, but for the time being, I don't think Combine is necessarily going away. And if they do replace things like published, or even just re-implement the internals, and we somehow found out about it, of like published and observable object and things like that, I think that's when I start to get really worried about the future of Combine. Although I think the official word is no, it's not going anywhere. But I think it's pretty clear to me that that's where the wind is blowing. Marco, you've used a little bit of Combine here and there, haven't you?
Yeah. So, besides published and observable object, which I've used, as I bridge my old code into the Swift UI world. So I use that, and I've also I make pretty good use recently in my recent code of the publisher for KVO bridge thing, that like there's like a method that you can get a publisher for like a key value thing on an object. So I use that a lot. And otherwise, that's about it. And so I've never written something that you would recognize as like functional reactive programming ever.
Sure.
And that being said, I do intend to lean more into the async stuff shortly. I have recently crossed over the threshold that I think it's safe for me to require iOS 15 for my app. I don't require it yet, just because I don't have any reason to yet. But next time I do a major thing, which is probably going to be when I redo the now playing screen, I'm probably going to require 15 from that point forward, because there's a couple things I want to use from it. And so once I start requiring iOS 15, which will then allow me to use the native Swift async stuff, then I will probably jump more heavily into it. But that being said, I still have a ton of legacy code in my app that works fine and doesn't justify replacement, and that doesn't use this whole system. I mean, most of it isn't even Swift. Most of that kind of stuff. I already have libraries for things like collating messages over time and stuff like that. Like, I've already written a lot of those, and they work, and they're already done. So a lot of that stuff, I'm just my legacy baggage is going to keep me from using a lot of this stuff because I don't need to. But over time, I'll start using more and more of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Stephen Garrity writes, Marco has talked in the past about designing directly via code. I'd like to know what the design process for the recent Overcast redesign was like. Did you redesign major screens with the actual code in app, or did you use any design tools and mockups?
One of the reasons why it takes me a while to design things in the app is that I build everything. The way I design something is I try it in the code. I just try doing it, and I see how it looks, how it works. What challenges have arisen as a result of me doing that, and so I end up building a lot of things that I never ship design wise, or I try a lot of weird little tweaks here and there, and that's just how I work. I've never gotten into design via design apps. Never got into graphic, Photoshop or the mock-up tools that exist now that aren't exactly Photoshop, but allow you to do mock-ups in a more specialized tool. I've never gotten into any of those things, and part of that's simply because I'm not a designer. Part of that's simply because I can't draw. But part of that is also just like the language I use, like the creative tool I use to try out a design is just building it. It's as simple as that. And until I build it, I can't really tell whether and how it's going to work. I build it and I put it on my phone in hardware, so off of my Mac screen. Like, let me see it in hardware to see how this works and how it feels and everything. And that's how I design. So it takes a while, but that's just always been how I do it. And that's simple as that. And I think this is also kind of the luxury of being a one-person shop, that because I am doing the design myself, because I'm conceptualizing design myself, I don't have to worry about the intermediary representations or steps or processes. If I'm working with a designer, obviously I wouldn't expect the designer to be able to code everything up in UIKit or Swift UI, so that would be a different story. I would have to use one of these tools. But because I'm the programmer and the designer, and I'm coming up with these designs myself and trying them out, I have that feedback loop of okay, well, I think this might look good if I do this. Let me try this. And then I see, okay, well, here's the challenge of doing that. If I do that, it's going to break here, here, and here, or I can do, 80% of what I want visually for 10% of the effort in the code. So let's probably do that instead. I have all the benefits of that kind of feedback loop. And I can see instantly what doesn't work, what works, what's made difficult by the frameworks, what's made easy by the frameworks. And that allows me, I think, to have a lot of advantages in the way I do that. But the disadvantage is that it does take a little bit longer to iterate on a design, because I'm actually building, and I'm not even using the live previewing stuff in Swift and Swift UI, because it always breaks for me. I can never get it to work reliably. So I'm literally just trying something and hitting build and run every single time. Every time I change anything, tweak a color, tweak a spacing, change it in the code, hit build and run, pops up. I'm doing all of that every single time. and it works for me. But obviously that kind of thing does not work for everybody.
All right, so Carl Fryer writes, I'm new to the Mac, and I am missing a feature on Windows called Sound Mixer. It is a function of the audio system that allows the user to control volumes of specific applications. Is there a good third-party program for this on the Mac?
Is there ever?
Is there ever?
I put in the screenshot here of he provided a screenshot of the Windows feature that shows little application icons with volume sliders, and the matching screenshot from Rogue Amoeba's sound source that shows little icons of applications with volume sliders. It was so perfect. It's just right on their marketing page. I didn't even know if SoundSource did this, but if your question is how can I do something with audio on the Mac, Rogue Amoeba is the place to check immediately. Someone said Paul was on the talk show and he was saying they have Rogue Amoeba, but Rogue Amoeba is hard for people to spell because they write rouge and who knows how to spell amoeba. So I think they have macaudio.com. Anyway, learn how to spell the word rogue and the word amoeba. It's a good exercise, and go to rogueamoeba.com and check out SoundSource, which looks like just a very fancy way for you to pick the source of your sound, but it has so many features, and one of them is per application volume control.
Thanks to our sponsors this week, Squarespace, Linode, and Kolide. And thanks to our members who support us directly. You can join atp.fm/join. And we will talk to you next week.
Now the show is over. They didn't even mean to begin. 'Cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research. Marco and Casey wouldn't let him. 'Cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Twitter, you can follow them at CASEYLISS. So that's Casey Liss, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse. It's accidental. They didn't mean to. Accidental. Tech podcast so long.
So I've realized something about myself, and maybe everyone around me knew this but me, but I feel like I am following in my dad's footsteps as I get ever older, and I need a project. So if you remember early on in pandemic, my project was use 300 Raspberry Pis to do something very, very simple because I can. And then I didn't have a project for a long time. Then I had the replace all the switches in the house with, I think they're called decorator switches instead of toggle switches, which in my opinion look way better. Maybe you disagree. It doesn't really matter. Now that I've completed that project, I need a new project. And I have semi-decided that my new project is going to be put at least a couple of Ethernet drops in the house, in the walls.
Oh,
which is not something I should be doing for about 300 reasons. But that is the project that I'm considering embarking on. And the issue that I have, well, I have many issues, trust me, but one of the primary issues that I have is that I would like, so my office, if you imagine my house as I was going to say a big rectangle, but it's not a very big house, but if you imagine my house as a rectangle, and if you think about the northeast corner of the rectangle, that is where the office is. I would like a Ethernet drop on the western side of the house, so clear across the house, but also upstairs like my office is. So presumably I can get into the attic and go across the attic, and that wouldn't be too terrible. But the other place I want an Ethernet drop is directly below my office and across the house the short way. So my office and my bedroom are across the house the long way, but on the same floor. The living room, which is the other place I want the Ethernet drop, is across the house the short way, but down a floor. And I don't know what to do about this, because at first I thought, let's just assume I can get into the walls, so to speak, and like fish, wire through the walls. Well, that shouldn't be too bad. But then I got wondering, well, if I'm doing that, is it really the right answer to put like a panel of Ethernet drops in the office as that's the place that terminates all these Ethernet drops? Because what if the office, which is bigger than Michaela's bedroom that she's using right now, what if she moves into the office at some point and I go back to her bedroom, which was my original office when Declan was first born, when we first moved in the house? So then I've got all these Ethernet drops terminated in her bedroom. And then that makes me wonder, well, okay, where would I terminate all these Ethernet drops otherwise? I don't particularly want it in my room.
The garage.
And so that's I think the most logical conclusion. And I guess my question, I'm mostly just talking just because I wanted to tell the story and see what you guys had to say about it. But one of the things I was wondering is if I terminate in the garage, like that has some semi-wild temperature swings. Like I'm not saying it's as much as you guys get. It
doesn't matter.
Different for sure. But
for this kind of stuff, it doesn't matter.
So that's what I was going to ask. Like, does your average not crappy switch and like Eero, for example, could that handle the 20-ish degrees to? Well, and this is outdoors, but
Eero is maybe not as robust as like a business enterprise data center type thing, because data center stuff are built to handle difficult temperature situations. I'm not sure if the Eeros are. Did I miss the part where you eliminated the basement?
Well, I only have a crawl space, and that is a possibility for sure. And the crawl space is not terribly, like it's more of a crouch space than a crawl space, but it is not.
How's the environment control in there? Is it better than the garage in terms of temperature fluctuations?
Maybe
worse?
It would be a little better, but not tremendous. But the thing is, I don't want to terminate all the Ethernet down there, because what if I have to futz with it? Then I don't want to have to crawl under the crawl space.
No, you want the garage. It's like here. I've had switches in my garage here for 12 years. First I had an HP big, 18 port one, and then I moved over to the Ubiquity stuff, whatever that was 4 or 5 years ago. It's been fine. It's been rock solid. I've never had a problem. And the garage here is uninsulated. It's only touching the house on 2 of the 4 walls, and so it has one exterior wall plus the big front wooden door thing. So it's been fine. It's been totally fine, and so that's your answer.
I mean, you don't have that many devices though. I mean, like I know Marco's got the overkill thing with the rack and rack mounted things or whatever. But like honestly, how many things?
I
are even
mean,
in
rack
your house?
is generous. It's a bent piece of metal that holds 3 or 4 just against the wall. Like it's not.
I know, but you could just Velcro an 8-port switch to any wall and it's fine.
Yeah.
Well, and I think I would probably do something like that. The other thing that's really appealing about using the garage is that when the house was built, it was a single zone air conditioner, and the furnace was in the garage. And so that means there at the time was a bunch of, I don't know the technical term for this, but a bunch of ductwork running under the house to service the downstairs. And then there is some ductwork that was running up to the attic to then split off to the upstairs. Well, around the time Declan was born, we went to a 2-zone system. So now there's a furnace in the attic and there's a furnace in the crawl space. And that means, interestingly, that the area that was in the garage where the ductwork went to the attic is just empty now. Like it's capped off, but there's basically ductwork that is not being used and nothing in it. And is a obscenely large circle in which I can put Ethernet cable to get from the downstairs to the upstairs. But then what I need to do though is I would need to run, 1 or more Ethernet runs from the office, at least the way it is today, clear across the house to go down into the garage,
but
and then
you're
I would
running
need
across
to,
in the attic, right? That's ideal.
Yes, I am running across in the attic, but it's still, but I'm talking about considerably more distance than I would otherwise need to do if I was just going.
No, I think that's fine. I think you have an ideal scenario. You have a way to easily get from your garage up to your attic, and then from your attic you can go across to any room and drop down into the walls.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Hypothetically, yeah.
That's what to do, because think about like you can burn length like crazy here, because the Ethernet is pretty good up to 100 meters without any really compromises. 100 meters can like wrap around your house a number of times, like on the outside, like you'd be fine. Yeah. So it would be you can do things that you wouldn't necessarily think of as solutions, like what John said, like just everything goes up to the attic, and then you go across. You move laterally across the attic as much as you need to, and then you drop down through the wall cavities as you go. Like that's the way to go.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And the only thing that gives me a little bit of pause is, and I forget the numbers off the top of my head, but I'd started asking these questions in some Slacks that we're in, and I think you had pointed out, Marco, that Cat 6, and jump in when you're ready,
6A is what you want.
Well, so hold on. So Cat 6 can only do 10 gigabit, which I do not have a single piece of 10 gigabit equipment in the house right now. But eventually I might. And Cat 6 can only go something like 100 meters, which is like 300 feet or something like that. without having real problems at 10 gigabit speed. But Cat 6a, to your point, can go something like 500 meters. And although I agree, I don't think any single run would be 100 plus meters. That makes me wonder if I should go 6a. But I've heard rumblings, having never handled, having never had to crimp or anything with Cat 6 versus Cat 6a. I've understood that 6a is kind of a pain in the rear to deal with as compared to 6. I am talking way outside.
Not as much as 7.
Well, so I hear, Mr. Cat 7 everywhere.
What's the difference between 6a and 6 in terms of crimping? We know i7 is a mess. It's totally different, like end connector.
Yeah, it's solid core, which is the worst. The solid core is the worst because it pulls out of everything.
And also that has the conductor sheath thing that has to be like grounded. The 7 is a big pain, but 6 and 6a should be the same, right? Like what's even the difference? Maybe a little bit thicker wires?
I think the wires are thicker, and I thought that there was some sort of like sheath around all the twisted pairs, like more than normal
7.
or
I
something.
think that's 7 you're thinking.
7 definitely has that.
Maybe.
But regardless, people RPL Mac or RLP Mac in the chat says 6A also has metallic shielding. So maybe it's just metallic shielding, but not solid core cables. But either way, that's a minor difference. But one thing you want is first of all future proofing, et cetera. But also you have to account for the fact that your installation is going to be imperfect. And so it's if you can get 6A instead of 6. Maybe the metal shielding is a little bit of a pain, but that might get you a little bit more protection against like this one cable that has, a bend in it that goes in a way it shouldn't, or that got a little bit scraped along the way into the connector or something like you get like a little bit more forgiveness buffer there for when things don't go exactly perfectly according to spec with your actual installation. So that's why it's nice to have some kind of headroom. But again, there's a balance here. Like if it's going to make every single termination point much more likely to have problems or fail or to not be in spec at all, then obviously, that's not, maybe that might be going too far. But I would say, Cat 6 is totally fine. If you want to just run Cat 6 and be done with it, that's totally fine. I would look into 6A just because, it is the higher standard and you can get, if it's not going to be too much more trouble to run 6A, you might as well have that additional flexibility and possible speed down the road.
Yeah, I agree with you. So who did this? Neil __ put in the chat an image that they found that's a really good visual, if this is accurate, and I have no reason to believe it isn't, a really good visual representation of what this looks like in the difference between 6 and 6A. And that looks to me like it's kind of a pain in the butt, but again, I don't know what I'm talking about. I did help my dad run, God knows what version of, it was probably Cat 1, if such a thing even exists, Ethernet through our house back in the late 90s. But this was, almost 30 years ago now, so I barely remember any of that effort. But 6A looks like it's a minor pain in the butt, but maybe it's not as, maybe I'm getting myself worked up over nothing.
Yeah. Plus then you'll be future proof for when your Macs finally get the stuff that my Mac Pro already has, 10 gig Ethernet.
Yes.
It'll trickle down to lesser Macs eventually.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And in the chat says it's really not that bad to go 6A, and I should just stop being a baby.
I would also put forth the idea that you don't necessarily need to do this entire job yourself. I know this is foreign, but so for instance, it might be worth hiring someone to maybe do the patch panel for you. Maybe you run the cables if you insist on running the cables, but wiring up a patch panel sucks. And if you can have somebody do that who is an expert in that field and who doesn't think it sucks or is being paid to ignore the fact that it sucks, that is potentially a huge headache saver for you, while you still get to have the rest of it be a Casey project.
That is a fair point. You're also not considering the fact that...
too. Oh, jacks and patch panels. That sucks. You don't want to do that.
Well, and from what I saw, I watched a friend of the show, Quinn Nelson's video on when he wired his house, and it didn't look like jacks were that terribly bad. But again, I haven't done this in a long, long time, so maybe I'm dead wrong. Maybe it's a nightmare.
But the good thing is you don't have to do a lot. That's what I'm saying. You don't have to do a lot of them. You're going to have 5 jacks, right? And so you do it 10 times. Each one you do twice. You're going to screw it up a whole bunch of times, but eventually on the third or fourth try, you'll get it right, and then you're done. It's not like you're trying to wire an entire office building where
Yeah.
There's going to be trial and error. Maybe you even have to buy twice as much cable as you had to because you screw it up. But in the end, it is a tractable problem because you are not doing a wiring convention center.
Right. And beyond that, with regard to a patch panel, also consider that if this does go in the garage, which I think makes the most sense, I'm not necessarily above having a bunch of Ethernet cables just appear out of this, plenum or whatever it is, this hole in the ceiling, and then just come into a switch. I am not I am not above that.
Look, I have that with my stupid Cat 7 setup, and it sucks because that's why. Like, one time I had to replace the switch, so I had to unplug all the cables and plug them into a new switch, and then 3 of them, like some pin pulled out somewhere and they stopped working. Like,
well, that's why you don't go Cat 7.
Yeah, but the point is, if you're gonna have, even if you're gonna go 6A, like every time you have to unplug those root cables or whatever you refer to those as, like the main backbone cables to your house, you don't want to have to be unplugging those ever. Like you want those to terminate into something that is fixed in position, like a patch panel and like wall jacks. Like you don't want anything to ever have to flex those. Yeah, you get it working and then you don't touch it.
And again, I mean, consider, I think you're right that the rightist answer is to pay somebody to do the whole damn thing. But the whole point is to keep me from going bananas while I'm still not quite out in the world. Although supposedly Michaela is going to get her shot in the next couple of months.
Oh, that's great.
Fingers crossed. I mean, this is still, they're talking about it next month. They should have been talking about it already, but that's neither here nor there. But they're going to talk about it in June. So maybe July, it might be a 4th of July miracle or something like that. But anyways, since I'm not back in the world quite yet in any meaningful way, I need something to do with my time, and I've gotten Masquerade over the line. I actually have a peek of view update, a very minor peek of view update waiting to be released, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, I saw that come through Tesla. It kind of made me smile. I'm like, oh yeah, peek of view.
That's still a thing. Who knew? But anyways, so I need something to occupy my time, and it also is worth noting, I should have said this at the beginning, I have no need for this, like zero need for this, because remember, I am a humongous fan and a cheerleader for Mocha bridges. So thanks to the coaxial cable that's in the house, the main place that I really want to have Ethernet other than in my office is downstairs in the living room, because that's where the Apple TV is. And that's also where the screened-in porch has an Ethernet jack in it, and that's connected via the living room. I can get like 600 megabits through, Ethernet to Mocha Bridge to coax to Mocha Bridge to Ethernet. I can already do that today. There is no point in me doing this other than I need something to occupy my hands and my brain and my time. So I just want a project.
You get 300 to 400 more megabits.
Well, that's the thing. I could get more. I could get more of the bits, man. I want the bits. You got the mots? I got the mots. So anyway, that's a reference, John.
Also, like, why do you want, like, all those different bridges and everything? That's just more things that can go wrong. Like, the simpler you can make it, the better.
That is true, but A, how many wires are in Cat 6, 8? How many things can I make go wrong?
Fair.
But and B, these Mocha bridges have been freaking bulletproof. They have been some of the most bulletproof hardware I've ever owned, as I knock furiously on wood, but they are just preposterously reliable, especially since the coaxial cable was an afterthought in this house and must have been run in like the late 90s, early 2000s. And I'm still getting almost a gigabit through it. So this is entirely useless, but that is basically the definition of my life. So here we are. But anyway, so if you had genuinely, all kidding aside, if you have done this yourself, and have tips other than hire somebody, which is the correct answer, please reach out via Twitter or email if you must. If you've been here, lived it, done it, if you have like a YouTube video that you suggest me to watch, I'm all ears, because I'd really love pointers, because I'm probably going to screw something up doing this. But that's part of the fun.
I will say too, like, this is one of those areas where if you're going to do this, figure out what the really good tools are and just buy the absolute best tools, like the best like crimp things.
Marco found a way for you to spend money on this.
Just surprise.
Yeah, well, it's not. They aren't that expensive. It's like maybe $100 for at most for like the combination of things you're gonna need here. But like just get there's certain things that you can do stuff without crimping, or crimpless kind of things, or these weird pass-through things. I don't know. Every time I've tried to do this, I've failed. So maybe I'm not the best person to take advice from, but having the right tools for this job can make a very big difference in how much work it is, how what your failure rate is for your punch downs or your connectors. Like it's very much definitely like figure out what the right tools are and get them. Get a tester. All this stuff. Heck, I'll probably just mail you mine because I can't use it.
You know, ask Quinn what he used, because he apparently
Well,
went okay in
and
his
actually, Quinn's video, if you look at the description, he includes almost everything Amazon links, presumably affiliate links, because that's what I do, links to almost everything he used and suggested in the video, and including a couple things that he actively suggests not to use. So I've gotten a lot of the tool recommendations from his video. I haven't actually spoken to Quinn about this. I should at some point. But yeah, if you have personal experience with it and have pointers, I'd love to hear. Or if you need to, maybe the right answer is all of you just tell me, don't do it, which maybe is the best answer. But I need a project, y'all. I need a project.
No, and honestly, it's fun. Like dealing with Ethernet stuff, like it's kind of old school, you know. So it's very like physically satisfying. Like, you know, you get to physically like punch these wires into these things, and then all of a sudden your stuff is fast and reliable. Like it's very cool. And having Ethernet in your house is a very good idea. Like that, for all the mentioned reasons I just mentioned. Like you don't want to have to deal with bridges and weird other broadcast standards, and you want to be hardwired directly from your computer through a switch to your FiOS box. Like you want all of that to be hardwired Ethernet, like exactly as fast as it can be. You don't want to have to deal with, you know, I can only get 300 to 600 megabits. No, get your gigabit. Like get gigabit. Don't you have gigabit Ethernet service to from FiOS? Yeah. Yep. So get your full gigabit. Well, like that, you should have that. You're a computer professional. Like if it takes running like one $15 span of wire between your computer and the garage to make it happen, make it happen. You know?
Yeah, and it's actually one of the things I looked at, and that's giving me a little bit of pause because I'm cheap, is the cheapest spool of Cat 6 or Cat 6A maybe I was looking at. It's like $200 for a spool of like a couple hundred feet of Ethernet cable, which is probably reasonable, but I did not realize it was that expensive. It's like, holy God, I better be really sure that I accomplish this if I'm going to spend a couple $100s on cable alone. But this all started, the funny thing is this all started with, I kept going to Monoprice, which I do love, and buying like a 1-foot Ethernet cable here, 3 feet there, 2 feet there for like one-off little uses all around the house. And it occurred to me, none of these, I always, even if I measure, I always get it wrong. I either buy something too short or too long. I could fix this. Like, I have crimped Ethernet cable in the past. Granted, I was like 16, but I've done it. And it's easier now with like the pass-through stuff, like you mentioned, Marco. So like, why don't I just buy a spool of Ethernet and just make my own little 1-foot, 2-foot, 3-foot cables? And then it's a small jump from there to, screw it, let's wire the whole darn house.
You don't want to do that. Because like, first of all, like getting really good Ethernet cables pre-made is actually not that expensive.
So, no, but when you're doing it...
The pre-made short ones use stranded wire too, which is way more sort of supple and flexible for short runs, whereas the spools you're going to get are all going to be stiffer and gnarlier, and you're not going to want to use them for your 2-foot cable. Yeah,
because if you're going to get a spool, presumably you're going to want some kind that's rated to be in walls. That's a somewhat important factor here. So, that's going to be, thicker. Yeah, as John said. So, but also just... that's not worth the time to like crimp on an end. Like, you could, when you can get a really good Ethernet cable for a few dollars, just buy them. And one option you may want to consider, I don't know if you should consider this off the top of my head, especially in regards to things like in-wall ratings that I literally just mentioned. But another option you could get is just buy a few 100-foot Ethernet cables pre-made and just fish them through the walls. Like, that is an option. Like, I don't think it's a very good option, but it would avoid a lot of problems. So like,
it's what I did. My house right now is I bought a couple 100 feet of cable that is not exactly the right length, but that is long enough to reach everywhere that I get, all with pre-made ends on them. And so far so good for 10 years or whatever I've been running this.
Yeah, like that is a totally valid option. You could totally do that.
Because I only have to go to like, I go to the computer room and I go to the television. Do I go anywhere else? No, that's it. Computer room and television. And so that covers my PlayStation, all the computers in the house, and anything ever connected to the TV, all directly connected to Ethernet, which, by the way, your kids will appreciate because they will have lower latency when playing online games.
Well, and there is an Ethernet drop via Mocha, via coax in the living room, but I hear you. Now, so somebody in the chat room suggested TrueCable.com. TrueCable.com's Cat 6 Plenum Unshielded, $200 for 500 feet. Oh, what's 1,000 feet? Shoot, that's not fair. So it's $289 for 1,000 feet of Cat 6.
But do you need 1,000 feet?
Probably not, but it's almost $300. The smallest amount of Cat 6A I can get that's plenum rated is 1,000 feet, $513. Holy jamolies, I don't need that.
Well, wait till you see how much it would cost to have someone else do it for you.
Well, that's true. That's a fair point.